Things started to go wrong when my old classmate called me for help, saying that his father, who lived with him, was not human. His father would lie beside his bed at night, staring intently at him, and making gurgling sounds like he was drowning. To confirm, I went to his house myself. The old man seemed perfectly normal, even the hidden birthmark on his shoulder was identical. But on my way home, passing through the old street, I bumped into an exact match in the crowd. The same face, the same birthmark, even the clothes were the same ones he wore before he disappeared. At that moment, my classmate called, his voice trembling, telling me that his father had been sitting at home watching TV the whole time, never leaving his side. If the one at home was real, then what was this old man wandering the street with his empty eyes? This story begins 2 weeks ago. I am a time traveler, running a small wood carving shop. I've been in this world for 5 months without any special advantages, until my old classmate Hong Anjie contacted me. He wanted to commission a half-length wood carving for his father's 55th birthday. But the fear on his face was impossible to hide. He gripped his scalding coffee cup tightly, his voice barely audible. He told me in a very low voice that the person in the house wasn't his father at all, because a real father would never stare at the table and sneer while eating, would never lie by his bedside in the middle of the night watching him, and would never make that strange, drowning like gurgling sound from throat when he was alone. To find out the truth, and to perfectly recreate the expression of the wood carving, I followed him home. It was a self-built house in the suburbs. The moment I stepped into the living room, I even had an indescribable illusion, as if I heard some kind of rhythmic, strange sound. But it vanished in an instant. On the sofa, a red book was intently watching TV. His expression and tone were no different from an ordinary old man. We even secretly checked the light red birthmark under his collar while pouring tea. The location and shape of the birthmark were perfect. At that moment, we all breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was just a false alarm. But just as I said goodbye and went home, about to eat a bowl of wontons on the streets of the old town, I brushed past a thin figure. The person had dark skin, walked stiffly, and was like a puppet without a soul. When I finally saw his profile, a bone-chilling cold instantly shot from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. The face and figure were exactly like Hong Anjie's father. I couldn't believe it. I took out my phone and dialed Hong Anjie's number. When he said his father was sitting at home, I felt a chill run down my spine. If the one at home was real, then what was this lifeless shell wandering the streets? To prevent him from getting lost, I suppressed my fear and took this vacant-eyed Hong Shu back to my rented apartment. The old evergreen community had a 70-year history. The hallway was dark and oppressive. I settled him on the sofa and even thoughtfully poured him a bowl of wontons I had brought back. He just chewed mechanically without saying a word. I excused myself to go to the bedroom to get something, and my gaze fell on the half-length wooden sculpture on the workbench. The sculpture was 90% complete, and the facial features were almost identical to the Hong Shu outside. Just as I was about to charge my phone, a chill ran down my back. I instinctively turned around, and my heart skipped a beat. Uncle Hong, who had been sitting in the living room, had disappeared without a trace. He stood behind me, expressionless, staring motionless at the statue on the workbench. I brought home the old man I'd picked up on the street, but I never expected to bring back a man-eating monster. My old classmate suspected his father had been switched, but I bumped into his real father on the street. I thought it was just a case of a cuckoo taking over someone else's home, but the moment I turned to charge my phone, the old man silently pressed against my back. I calmly pointed at him, trying to communicate, but the next second he suddenly reached out and grabbed my shoulder tightly. The strength was astonishing, not something a 50-year-old could possess. His cheek was almost touching my nose, and a chilling gurgling sound, like drowning, was coming from his throat. He wasn't real human, he was definitely an unknown, strange being. Like a maddened beast, he opened his mouth and lunged at my neck. In that critical moment, I suddenly bent my knee and slammed it into his abdomen, using the recoil to push him away. He stumbled backward, crashing heavily into the unfinished half-length wooden sculpture on the workbench. Losing his balance, he plummeted from the surface, striking him squarely on the forehead. A dull thud followed, and the room fell into a deathly silence. Then came Hong Anjie's urgent knocking at the door. I gasped for breath, my heart pounding with fear, and rushed to open it. But when I led Hong Anjie back into the bedroom, the scene before us utterly stunned us. The floor was empty except for the fallen half-length wooden sculpture. Uncle Hong, who had just tried to attack me, had vanished without a trace, as if he had never existed. Hong Anjie had received a call from a neighbor saying his father had suddenly collapsed and been taken to the hospital. He had left in a hurry, leaving me alone in the empty rented room. Clutching a sharp knife, I searched every corner of the room, under the bed, in the wardrobe, on the sofa, but found nothing. As I sat back down at the workbench, my gaze returning to the wooden sculpture, my right eye suddenly felt dry. An itch appeared, followed by a line of silvery white text that abruptly floated in my vision. Red Soldier's current trait. Understanding level 20%. 5 months of transmigration. My cheat ability has awakened in such a bizarre way. I rubbed my eyes, and when my gaze refocused on the wooden carving, I saw a scene I would never forget. Inside the carving, a dark afterimage was curled up. The outline of that afterimage was exactly the same as Jia Hongbing, who had just disappeared. He was trapped inside this wooden carving. Immediately, 3 semi-transparent progress bars appeared at the edge of my vision. The first line read, Mental Antibody, next to which was a gray progress bar showing antibody level 0. The second line read, Physical Strength, displayed in traditional Chinese as 37%. The third line read, Previous Skills, displayed as none. I finally understood. Never respond to someone counting with their back to you in the wilderness. My classmate's father didn't understand this rule and casually replied with 6 in the rapeseed field. That one sentence made him instantly lose consciousness. When he woke up, there was a perfect replica of his memories and appearance in his house. The imposter father, this substitute, would stare at the table and sneer during meals, and at night, he would lie by the bedside watching others. Even more terrifying, when alone, he would make a gurgling sound like he was drowning. Fortunately, I stumbled upon the mystery. At that moment, Hong Anjia called to tell me that his father had woken up and his mental state had completely returned to normal. This confirmed my suspicion that the dark figure trapped in the wooden carving had been remotely interfering with the real Red Soldier. I asked Hong Anjia to inquire about his father's recent experiences. It turned out that Uncle Hong had encountered a person counting with his back to him in a rapeseed field in the suburbs. The person was chanting, "I'll count to 1. You count to 2. Uncle Hong, caught off guard, subconsciously replied with 6. When he woke up in the hospital, there was already a cuckoo taking over his home. As the truth was gradually revealed, a notification sound kept ringing in my mind. Red Soldier's current characteristic understanding level 60%. Current characteristic understanding level 85%. Understanding of Red Soldier's characteristics has reached over 8. Conditions for absorption have been met. Can enhance host's physical strength. Without any hesitation, I immediately issued the absorption command in my mind. The wooden carving in front of me trembled slightly, and then I felt a glimmer of light emanating from the skin of my hands. The physical strength progress bar under my eyes soared to 52%. I casually picked up a piece of incredibly hard ironwood scrap, and with just a slight exertion, my 5 fingers sank into the wood, leaving 5 deep finger marks. This terrifying grip strength finally gave me the ability to absorb the characteristics in this unknown world. The confidence to protect myself. But the real terror was just beginning. At sunset, I closed the door of the wood carving shop and walked back to the evergreen ivy community as usual. But as soon as I got downstairs, I saw flashing warning lights and yellow cordon tape. I went up the stairs and reached the corner on the 3rd floor. My steps suddenly froze. The door of the room directly opposite the stairwell was wide open. A cold body was lying on the floor, its cheek pressed tightly against the cold ground. It was Lin Wanru, the single mother who lived downstairs from me. What chilled me to the bone was her exposed eye. Her eyelid was forcibly opened by an invisible force, and her pupil was completely filled with dark red fluid. She was staring intently in the direction of the stairwell, as if scrutinizing everyone who passed by. The feeling of being locked on by that deathly gaze made my heart feel as if it were being pierced by an invisible. The sheriff's large hand gripped mine tightly, stopping me and telling me that a serious, unknown incident had occurred and that I should go upstairs immediately and not wander around. I suppressed my trembling and quickly fled back to my rented room on the 4th floor, locking the door and turning on all the lights, trying to dispel the gloom in my heart. I forced myself to sit at my workbench and continue carving the ebony Buddha statue, trying to distract myself with focus. But that bloodshot, dark red eye lingered in my mind like a nightmare. At midnight, I wearily climbed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I was awakened by a bone-chilling cold. I groggily opened my eyes and found myself still covered by the blanket, but the room temperature had dropped to freezing. I instinctively looked towards the foot of the bed, and just one glance made my blood freeze. The bedroom door, which I had locked before going to sleep, was now wide open. A very slight tremor came from the foot of the bed. The sound was extremely faint, yet amplified infinitely in the silent darkness. By the pale moonlight streaming through the window, I saw a dark mass slowly writhing on the floor at the foot of the bed, as if a person were crouching there in an extremely contorted posture, their back arching intermittently. Holding my breath, I sat up, my hands and feet icy cold, and pulled a self-defense flashlight from under my pillow, clutching it tightly. Barefoot, I moved silently off the bed, inch by inch. The moment I finally mustered the courage to press the flashlight switch, the blinding light tore through the darkness and illuminated that nightmarish figure. It was Lin Wanru, the woman who had already lost vital signs during the day. He was wearing that thin patient gown, and in a completely illogical way, he slowly stood up. His movements were extremely stiff, his arms hanging naturally at his sides, as if his head was being forcibly pulled up by an invisible thread. His face was ashen white, devoid of any color, and there were still black marks at the corners of his mouth. His left eye, filled with dark red liquid, was fixed on me through the beam of the flashlight. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my back instantly pressed against the cold wall. How could someone who had clearly perished be standing here again, having silently sneaked into my room? I tried to move along the wall towards the door, my breath catching in my throat. When my gaze shifted to his back, I finally saw an even more horrifying scene. A huge dent in the back of his head. However, having suffered an extremely severe blunt force trauma, such an injury made it impossible for him to have any chance of survival. This was definitely not a simple case of unnatural resuscitation. I finally reached for the bedroom doorknob, preparing to step out and lock the door, when the body that had been standing motionless suddenly moved. It abruptly turned its head, opened its jaw, and let out a strange, inhuman roar from its throat. Its entire body lunged at the door like an arrow released from a bow. I was terrified and quickly pulled the bedroom door open. With a dull thud, bones were crushed, and it was wedged tightly in the crack of the door, struggling wildly, its ferocious mouth opening as it tried to attack my wrist that was gripping the doorknob. Instinctively, I let go, and the bedroom door was violently slammed open by its immense force. Like a mad beast, it lunged straight at my face. I quickly retreated. My escape route was completely blocked, so I could only dart into the narrow bathroom. But before I could even close the door, he had already rushed in after me, his head pressed against the back of my shoulder. In a split second, I suddenly crouched down, grabbed his long hair tightly with both hands, and unleashed the immense power I had gained after absorbing the Red Soldier's traits. I pushed off with my legs and executed a perfect over-the-shoulder throw. Lin Wan's incredibly strong body was thrown out by my monstrous force, shattering the bathroom window and plummeting straight down into the dark alley below. 2 seconds later, a dull thud and the crash of a trash can being overturned echoed from below. For breath, my hands trembling uncontrollably. As I struggled to my feet, I found myself leaning against the wall. The progress bar for the mental antibody at the edge of my vision suddenly plummeted from level 3 to the very edge of level 1. I instantly realized that the mental antibody was used to resist the mental impact of these unknown entities. If it weren't for the enhancement from the wood carving system, I might have lost the will to resist the moment I saw that eye. Just then, the silver-white text reappeared in my mind. Bloodline current characteristics, understanding level 5% Lin Wanru's left eye. That being called bloodline is the root of all this. A chilling thought raced through my mind, and I blurted out, could it be that this bloodline is controlling Lin Wanru's body? The system's notification instantly responded, blood eye current characteristics, understanding level 50%. You guessed right. It really is that I, at work. A crazy idea spread through my mind. Since the wood carving can contain Jiahong Bing, then, if I were to personally pluck out that blood red eye, could I seal it and absorb its eerie properties? I immediately rushed to the workbench, grabbed a sharp, rounded carving knife, the curved blade being perfect for precise peeling and picking. I didn't even bother putting on my coat, gripping the carving knife and running wildly down the stairs. A pungent, fishy stench permeated the back alley of the neighborhood. Under the dim streetlights, a pool of black sewage was spreading. A stray, mangy dog seemed to sense danger the moment I rushed into the alley. It let out a mournful howl, tucked its tail between its legs, and fled in panic. I suppressed the nausea churning in my stomach, stepping over the mess, and approached the crooked bridge-like creature lying beside the trash can. It lay there quietly, its eyes closed, no longer displaying the terrifying aggression it had shown moments before. I took a deep breath, gripped the rounded carving knife tightly, squatted down, and began carving with my other trembling hand. I gently pried open his left eyelid, but the instant it was removed, I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave. The carving knife in my hand nearly fell to the ground. There was nothing in the empty eye socket. The eerie blood-red pupil that had emitted a dark red light was gone. After discovering that the eerie blood-red pupil had disappeared, a strong sense of unease rose in my heart. I carefully recalled that when I approached earlier, the mangy dog that had smeared filth on my pants was right next to Lin Wanru. Ian let out a wail. Could there be some connection between the two? Suddenly, the bathroom window on the second floor opened, and a male resident poked his head out. He saw Lin Wanru on the ground, then met my gaze, and shuddered in fright. He immediately shrank back and closed the window tightly. I broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, the curved knife in my hand was completely hidden in my sleeve and not exposed. Otherwise, if someone saw it, I would have no way to explain myself. I quickly got up and left the alley. The streetlights at the alley entrance were dim, and the mangy dog was nowhere to be seen. I quickly returned to my room on the fourth floor, turned on all the lights, and didn't move anything except changing my soiled pants. I sat on the sofa in the living room and waited. 5 minutes later, the first batch of police officers who came because of the downstairs residence report arrived. Soon after, Xiongwei arrived with 7 or 8 people. After the handover, the first batch of people left. Xiongwei's people quickly dispersed. Some checked the scene, and some went downstairs to cordon off the area. On May 10th, I described to Xiongwei and a female police officer the fact that I had gone downstairs with a curved knife to investigate their directions. The situation was too bizarre. I didn't believe a simple lie could fool these experienced homicide detectives. The damage to the door frame and windows, in my description, was attributed to Lin Wanru's unusual strength. They hadn't been able to get up. Xiongwei asked, Mr. Shen, are you alright? I shook my head. Fortunately, only my collar was torn by Lin Wanru's bite, but it didn't touch my skin, which was good. Xiongwei said. Later, a few other colleagues will take over the case here. They might ask you some questions. Please cooperate then. I nodded, somewhat taken aback, and asked, can I know the cause of Lin Wanru's death? Xiongwei and the female police officer exchanged a glance. Returning to the present, according to the forensic report, the cause of death was a blunt force trauma to the back of the head. The primary cause of death was confirmed as homicide. I nodded to myself. The dent on the back of his head I saw earlier should be the fatal wound. The sheriff's silence tacitly confirmed my guess, but my heart was in turmoil. If he was murdered, how did that blood red eye come about? How could he control Lin Wanru's body? It was all too bizarre and inexplicable. The sheriffs didn't offer much explanation as to why Lin Wanru was still moving. About an hour later, Xiongwei and the others left the building, and things returned to calm. They didn't even seal off my house, perhaps because of the special nature of this case. This was convenient. At least I could continue using my workbench. I suspected that the next group of sheriffs I was about to take over were specifically responsible for handling such special. Perhaps I could learn the secret of the blood red eye and Jiahong Bing from them. I vaguely guessed that it was related to the strange things hidden in the world, but this needed to be confirmed, and I absolutely could not reveal my ability to detect these mysterious existences. Looking up at the window, it was already bright outside. Aunt Shin upstairs was leaning over the stair railing, peering this way. After seeing the sheriff off, I didn't close the door and forced a smile. Aunt Shin immediately looked concerned and came over to check the room before asking, Little Shun, are you alright? What happened last night? They said someone fell from the building. A female thief who accidentally fell into the alley behind the building while stealing from my house. She has already been taken to the hospital by the sheriff. I told a white lie. If I had told him that Lin Wanru had died during the day and then returned last night, he probably would have fainted on the spot. Fortunately, it was dark, and Lin Wanru had changed into her uniform. You've been robbed. Are you alright? Aunt Shin exclaimed in shock. No wonder so many police officers came over earlier. I'm fine. I shook my head. Aunt Shin said, I'm going to the morning market to buy some fresh vegetables and breakfast. What do you want to eat? I'll buy it all together. No need. Thank you, Andy. I stretched. I was woken up late at night and wanted to catch up on some sleep. Aunt Shin nodded. It's good that you're alright. You should rest well. I'll cook some noodles for lunch. If you want to eat, just come upstairs. With that, she turned and went downstairs, closing the damaged door and tidying up the workbench. She glanced at the half-body wooden carving of Hongbin. After last night's struggle and the decline of my mental antibodies, I wanted to replenish them by staring at it, but my mind was completely occupied by that bloodline, lingering there. As if possessed, I rummaged through the woodpile and pulled out a piece of screen the size of an egg, covered in bumps. Its surface was uneven, but its natural growth pattern was strikingly similar to the chaotic visual nerves behind the eyeball. Its shape perfectly matched my conception of that blood-red eye. With an idea in mind, I immediately began carving, peeling away the skin and sketching the shape of that eye. It was already firmly imprinted in my mind. There was no need for a draft. I used a wire saw to cut it. After removing the excess, I replaced the spiral fine-toothed tool and began refining. During this process, I fell into an almost obsessive focus, forgetting the time, hunger, and fatigue. My mind was filled only with that eerie blood-red eye. What should have taken at least 24 hours to complete was finished from dawn till dusk, and the main body was already taking shape in my hands. After being trimmed with a rounded blade and refined with an electric dental machine, the eyeball became increasingly lifelike. As the city lights began to twinkle, I took a deep breath, slowly put down my tools, and stared at the almost completed eyeball in front of me. Only then did I feel a sense of being reborn. Currently, apart from the unfamiliar posterior visual acuity, the front and sides of the eyeball, which hadn't yet been carved, were perfectly replicated by me. I removed the wood carving from the table, and suddenly, an extreme sense of weakness overwhelmed me. My legs felt unsteady as I walked to the water dispenser and gulped down a large glass of water. From the early morning struggle, downstairs investigation, to dealing with the sheriff, my spirits were already stretched to the limit. Add to that 10 hours of almost frenzied carving, and now exhaustion washed over me like a tsunami. As soon as I collapsed onto the bed, I completely lost consciousness. The desk lamp was still on, and the night breeze swept through the building. Just as I said, this old-style residential building was quiet, without a single sound, exuding a chilling, deathly silence filled the air. Time passed, and I slept soundly until 5 p.m. the next day. I was woken by hunger. My stomach was growling even before I opened my eyes. I groggily opened my eyes to find a strange woman's face before me. She stood by the bed, looking down at me. I jumped up in shock. "Don't be nervous. I'm an investigator from the Public Security Bureau," the woman said, taking a step back. She smiled and spread her hands, saying, "I saw you were sleeping soundly, so I didn't wake you." She wasn't wearing a police officer's uniform, but a white t-shirt and jeans. As she spoke, she pulled out her badge and held it up to my face. The badge read, Yonge City Public Security Bureau. Below the Special Cases Investigation Team, Investigator Li Naijing was a black six-pointed star emblem. The sheriff I'd met before, Zhangwei, didn't have Li Naijing on his badge. I muttered to myself, that name has a strangely sweet, almost childlike quality to it. "How did you get in?" I asked, snapping out of my reverie. Li Naijing shrugged and walked in through the door. "The investigation team has many ways to open these junk locks and has the right to enter private property without the owner's permission." He turned and walked towards the living room. "Get up. Let's go to the living room and talk about yesterday's case details." As he turned, his gaze shifted from the half-finished item I was holding in my hand. A slight glint flashed across the finished wooden carving's eyes, but he didn't ask any further questions. He casually placed the carving on the bed, went to the bathroom, and then, pulling on his slippers, sat down on the sofa. Li Naijing cut to the chase. "Last night, after you encountered Lin Wanru's corpse, what was his walking style like?" I didn't hide anything. After thinking for a moment, I said, "It was as if his head was being pulled forward by something, and his limbs didn't seem to be exerting much force." "Did you notice anything unusual about his body?" Li Naijing's gaze remained fixed on me as he spoke. I replied, "His eyes." One of his eyes was blood red and quite wide open, looking terrifying. "It looked like the wooden carving you were holding just now," Li Naijing exclaimed. I paused for a moment and answered truthfully, "Yes. Perhaps it's because of my profession, but I naturally want to express things that leave a deep impression on me through wooden carving." Li Naijing nodded in understanding and continued. "After Lin Wanru's corpse fell, why did you run downstairs?" I was worried that other unsuspecting residents would approach because I had personally witnessed Lin Wanru's corpse, so I believed it was a case of a zombie rising from the dead. If someone approached out of curiosity at that time, it would be very dangerous. I made up a story. "Someone upstairs saw you squatting in front of the corpse, seemingly." "What are you checking?" Li Naijing asked again, his gaze now more scrutinizing. I nodded calmly and replied, "Because I noticed his blood-red eyeball is missing." "You found it when you lifted his eyelids?" Li Naijing asked. "I'm not stupid. I certainly can't answer that. Otherwise, it would be strange if I didn't arouse suspicion. No, I wouldn't dare do that." When I approached, the woman's eyelids were still open, but I only glanced at her and noticed that her left eyeball was missing. "Did you notice anything else unusual when you arrived in the alley?" Li Naijing seemed unsuspecting and continued to ask. I remembered that dog. That alley usually smelled. Aside from some stray dogs, very few people go that late. There was a dog there at the time, but it seemed to have scared it away when I went there. Li Naijing nodded and didn't ask me any more questions. I secretly pondered that, judging from Li Naijing's reaction, as long as I didn't pay too much attention to that eyeball, he should just think that it was a normal reaction after being stimulated. Li Naijing thought for a moment, took out his phone, made a call to me, and hung up immediately after one ring. He said, "Save my number. If there's anything unusual around you in the next 2 days, contact me immediately." I don't know how he got my phone number. I couldn't help but ask, "Is your investigation team specifically responsible for handling these special cases like zombies?" Li Naijing didn't answer directly. He stood up and said, "Compared to the sheriffs you usually see, our investigation team is all short-staffed. As for what kind of cases we handle, it is not convenient to disclose them to the public for the time being." After he finished speaking, he opened the door. There was a young man in a black t-shirt standing outside. When he saw him come out, he took 2 steps back, obviously waiting outside. At the corner of the stairs leading to the 5th floor, a man's back disappeared. Li Naijing pointed to the back and asked the young man, "Who is this person?" The young man glanced at him. It must have been a resident from upstairs carrying supermarket shopping bags who had just passed by. Li Naijing turned to me and said, "Lin Wanru's contact with you wasn't without reason. We'll continue investigating this case. In the meantime, if you discover anything suspicious, remember to notify us first if you go downstairs alone like last night." I didn't speak, just nodded. After escorting them downstairs, I slowly closed the door. I could still vaguely hear the rustling sound of plastic bags coming from upstairs. Lin Wanru's contact with me wasn't without reason, I silently repeated. I frowned, thinking, but had no clue. Just then, my stomach growled again. I realized I hadn't eaten in a long time, so I took a shower, changed my clothes, locked the door, and went downstairs to find something to eat. When I got to the 1st floor, I saw the hot-tempered Grandpa Wong cursing and swearing, holding a dirty iron shovel covered in filth. "Grandpa Wong, look who's made you angry again," I asked with a smile. Grandpa Wong raised his hand. Pointing to a mark in the corner of the stairs with a shovel, he shouted, "I don't know what bad luck has befallen our neighborhood these past few days. Yesterday, the girl surnamed Lin upstairs just passed away, and last night I heard there was a thief in the building. Today, there's suddenly a dead dog at the stairwell. I just shoveled it away and cleaned the area." "Damn, what bad luck." I was taken aback and asked, "Where did you throw the dead dog?" "Where else could I throw it? In the trash can behind? I'm going to pass by there anyway." Grandpa, your shovel is dirty too. Do you still want it? I'll throw it away for you, I said. Grandpa Wong shoved it into my hand. I forgot to throw it away earlier. Thank you. My aunt carried the shovel into the alley. I endured the stench and opened the 3 trash cans right next to the wall, searching through them one by one. After 10 minutes, I was certain the dead dog was gone. The place Grandpa Wong was talking about must be here. I was a little stunned. Could some shameless guy have picked up the dead dog and stewed it? I casually threw away the shovel and went to a small shop not far away to order a plate of. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but ask the passing proprietress, Sister Hui, your shop only sells beef, not dog meat, right? Sister Hui stopped and looked at me seriously. Xiaoshun, eating dog meat in this weather. I ask you, isn't that a bit much? I chuckled and lowered my head to focus on eating my noodles. After finishing my noodles, I strolled around the street for half an hour to digest them. Then I turned around and went back to my apartment complex. When I went upstairs, I saw that the place on the first floor where the dead dog had been was covered with a layer of absorbent and odor-proof fine ash. Passing by Lin Wanru's apartment on the 3rd floor, I saw that the yellow warning tape was still in place. Remembering the strange scene of her standing at the foot of my bed last night, I suddenly felt a chill and quickly went up to the 4th floor. I opened the door and went inside. I pressed the switch, but it didn't work. I pressed it twice more, and the green light on the water dispenser went out. There must be a power outage in the house. Using the light from the window, I walked to the bedroom door and then remembered that I had broken the flashlight last night. Just as I turned around to go downstairs to buy a new one, my eyes suddenly narrowed, and I vaguely saw a foot wearing dark pants quickly retracting at the kitchen door. Back in the kitchen, I immediately held my breath. The power outage was no accident. It was the work of this infiltrator. At the same time, a deep resentment rose within me towards the lock on the living room door. That broken lock was practically useless. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I wondered how long that person had been lurking. Perhaps they had prepared everything, just waiting for me to come home. I didn't believe it was a thief. There was no such coincidence. Just now, when I was walking towards the bedroom, the person hiding in the kitchen was clearly preparing to follow, but they were exposed when I suddenly turned around. Moreover, the person was wearing ordinary trousers. The long trousers weren't like Lin Wanru's attire. They must be a living person. I looked away, pretending not to notice the kitchen's anomaly, and muttered to myself, why is the power out again? As I walked to the living room door and reached out to pull it open, I caught a glimpse of someone in the kitchen who seemed unable to contain themselves. A small, dark shadow flew towards me with incredible speed. Just as I opened the door, I instinctively ducked down. With a thud, a kitchen knife slammed into the wooden door above my head, embedding itself a third of the way in. Looking up, I was instantly terrified, breaking out in a cold sweat and my scalp tingling. Damn, he can throw a cleaver this well? Is he some kind of acrobat? The man, in pain, immediately pulled it from the door panel with his left hand and, without hesitation, brought it down straight at my face, clearly aiming to kill me. My head was ringing from the impact. But in this life-or-death situation, my reaction was incredibly fast. I immediately released my grip, tilted my head sharply to the left, and the cleaver fell heavily, striking my right cheek. Sparks flew from the ground, and a sharp gust of wind stung my cheek. My breath caught in my throat, and I immediately grabbed his left hand holding the cleaver. A strange power suddenly erupted between my fingers, and with a crack, the man groaned and staggered back, his wrist injured, the cleaver falling from his hand. Just then, an extremely eerie noise suddenly came from the corridor outside the door. The sound was like grinding teeth, or perhaps an attack warning from some wild beast deep in its throat. The tall man froze, startled, and turned around. A filthy, mangy dog with multiple injuries was standing behind him, its lips curled up, revealing pale white fangs, its throat. The constant growling was chilling, especially the side of his left eye, a crimson pupil filling its entire socket, completely asymmetrical to his right eye. It wasn't a dog's eye at all, it looked more like a human eye. A chill ran down the man's spine as he saw this. The next second, the mangy dog, as if pulled by an invisible force like a puppet on strings, lunged at the man and bit him hard, forcing him to give up. I whirled around and swung my knife at the dog. Man and dog instantly became entangled in a fight. I seized the opportunity, pushing off with my feet and bracing myself with my hands as I retreated. My shoulder was throbbing with pain, but I couldn't care less. Stumbling back to the bedroom, I managed to close the door and retreat to the foot of the bed. I grabbed a pair of pajama pants and tried to wrap them around my shoulder to stop the bleeding, but my left shoulder was too weak to bandage properly. I hastily wrapped it a couple of times, and suddenly a muffled sound came from outside the door. All the struggle and movement stopped abruptly. I stared intently at the bedroom door. This door, damaged in the fight, couldn't be closed properly. Now only a dark crack remained, and I couldn't see anything. A strong sense of unease welled up inside me. I held my breath, my shoulder throbbed with pain, half my body went numb, and my chest ached terribly, as if I were about to faint. I clenched my right fist tightly and tiptoed forward a few steps, intending to grab a chair to block the door. But as soon as I took a step, that eerie growl was already close to the bedroom door. I stopped, no longer daring to move forward, and stared intently through the crack in the door. I saw a red eye slowly approaching, coldly observing the room. At that moment, half of the rascal's body had already squeezed into the bed. Without thinking, I stepped onto the bed. Suddenly, I charged towards the workbench. At the same time, the mangy dog smashed open the door, its low growl transforming into a battle cry. It circled around the foot of the bed and lunged at me fiercely. I grabbed the solid wood chair in front of the workbench and swung it behind me with one hand. In the nick of time, I braced myself against the mangy dog's gaping maw, barely managing to block its frenzied ramming with the horizontal bar connecting my toes. Wood chips flew everywhere, and the brutal impact left my arm numb. Excessive blood loss caused my strength to rapidly deplete. My right hand braced itself against the chair, while my left hand endured the tearing pain. A sharp pain shot through me as I reached for a wide-bladed, rounded knife on the table. The instant I gripped the wooden handle, a strong, pungent, fishy smell assaulted my nostrils. The horizontal bar beneath the chair snapped in two, and the grotesque head pierced through the chair leg, straight at my face. I had no time to react. My left hand gripped the rounded knife, and with a swift, powerful thrust, a sharp thud echoed as my injured left shoulder gave way. I gritted my teeth, desperately bracing my injured left shoulder against the chair, freeing my undamaged right hand to grab the knife handle and thrust with all my might. Just then, something fell and rolled beside me. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the image of Jiahong being held by the wooden eyeball. I was almost finished carving flashed through my mind, assuming the two had touched before. The next second, my left hand gripped the wooden eyeball tightly. Almost simultaneously, the crimson eyeball jolted violently, as if squeezed by an invisible force, rapidly shrinking and struggling frantically to escape. In just 2 or 3 seconds, it transformed into a black shadow and was absorbed into the wooden carving in my left hand. I was startled and quickly threw the carving away, focusing intently on the wooden eyeball rolling on the ground. There was a faint black shadow, exactly like the black shadow of the red soldier in the half-body wooden sculpture. Sure enough, I had been sucked into the wooden sculpture. I immediately understood that as a medium, by contacting the foreign object while holding onto the wooden sculpture, I could also achieve a containment effect. However, I was severely injured and exhausted at the moment. I could only barely sit up on the bed, take out my phone to report the incident, and ask for an ambulance. After hanging up, I collapsed as if I had collapsed. In my daze, I seemed to see many people enter the room. I was lifted onto a stretcher and fell into a coma. I don't know how much time passed. I slowly opened my eyes. My head was dizzy, but the pain had disappeared. I gently turned my stiff neck and found myself lying in a quiet, white single hospital room. My body was still weak. I simply closed my eyes and prepared to continue sleeping. At this moment, the door of the hospital room opened. I could hear the voices. It was Li Nijing, Sheriff Xiong Wei, and the young man who had been with Li Nijing last time. The young man said a few words, and then Li Nijing and Xiong Wei fell silent and went to the window to talk in hushed tones, not trying to hide. I simply closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, listening quietly to their conversation. After a while, I finally realized that, just as I had expected, the man lurking in my kitchen, preparing to silence me, was indeed the murderer who killed Lin Wanru due to a relationship dispute. This guy's profession was actually a fitness instructor. No wonder he was so muscular. Because the sheriff had blocked the news, the murderer didn't know it was Lin Wanru's body and went home to find me. He mistakenly thought I had witnessed some clue. Seeing the sheriff's frequent visits, he couldn't sit still and directly broke into my house to silence me. Of course, the sheriffs couldn't understand why that mangy dog had also appeared. Moreover, Li Nijing and the others didn't find the red eyeball at the scene. According to the on-site examination results, this guy was lucky to be alive. The murderer had fought with the mangy dog at the door. His throat was bitten open, and his wrists and knees had broken bones. There were signs of a rift, but the dog also had a fatal knife wound. It was a lose-lose situation. Xiong Wei deduced that the mangy dog had killed the murderer and then ran into the inner room to continue biting Shun Xian. However, it became exhausted and Shun Xian used her utility knife to kill Li Nijing. Lin Wanru was murdered. The murderer was brought to justice. Now your case is closed. As for the dead dog and Shun Xing's fate, we will investigate in detail. Hearing this, I was secretly alarmed. Now I was certain that the Public Security Bureau strictly distinguished between ordinary and bizarre cases. Xiong Wei was in charge of ordinary cases, and Li Nijing specialized in bizarre events. Even so, I couldn't reveal all my secrets. While pretending to be asleep, I quickly planned how to give my statement later. Just then, a deep, middle-aged man's voice suddenly rang in my ears. He was awake. Li Nijing and Xiong Wei immediately stopped talking. I was startled. I never expected this. The thought that there was a fourth person in the ward, and that he had been sitting silently by my bedside observing me since earlier, made my heart race. The monitor next to me immediately reacted. I couldn't keep up the act any longer, so I coughed twice and slowly opened my eyes. What came into view was a middle-aged man with a slightly sallow complexion and a thin build. His hair was messy, and he was wearing a yellowish-gray jacket. His gaze was deep and composed, as if he could see through all my thoughts. So he was already awake? Li Nijing walked over and shrugged. Actually, it's nothing to hear. You've already encountered something unusual. We can't hide it from you. We CA and hide it from you. After saying that, he looked at the middle-aged man by the bed. Brother Zheng, what do you think? I later learned that his name was Zheng Rujun, the head of the Special Case Investigation Team in Yung City. He hadn't said a word since he came in, just sat quietly by my bedside. Zheng Ruijuan didn't speak, but nodded. Li Nijing seemed to have benefited from this. Look me straight in the eye. Do you believe in ghosts? I paused, my voice hoarse. I didn't believe before, but I do now. The young man sitting on the other side said, actually, even now, none of us in the investigation team really believe in ghosts. Hearing this, I was taken aback. Li Nijing introduced him as Zhao Wenba, the head of our investigation team. Zheng Rujun, why don't you believe? I asked. Zhao Wenba smiled and shook his head without answering. Li Nijing said, because what we encountered was so bizarre, that we couldn't accurately and effectively define these bizarre events. I nodded thoughtfully. The mangy dog that died in your bedroom, is it the one you told me about in the trash can behind the community? Zheng Ruijuan asked. I didn't react for a moment. Then my face turned awkward and I nodded. Yes, that's the one. Was there anything different when I saw him the second time? Zheng Ruijuan asked. I quickly composed myself and tried to recall. The first time, I didn't notice the dog had even dirted my pants. But the second time, I noticed that its eye was different. It was as if Lin Wanru's bloodshot eyes had appeared in its socket. Zheng Ruijuan nodded slightly, looking at Li Nijing, and Zhao Wenba and the others seemed to have guessed it long ago, but only now did they get confirmation from me. Did you see that blood-red eye? Actually, the sheriff didn't find the blood-red eye in my bedroom, except for that half-finished wooden carving that looked like blood bronze. As for that wooden carving, along with the half-body wooden carving of Hong Bing, it was still on my workbench. As a handicraft, it naturally didn't attract the attention of the investigation team. I pretended to recall and quickly pondered my words, then paused and replied. In my haste, I think I used a curved knife to stab. Later, I saw the dog seem to fall to the ground, but I couldn't hold on any longer and quickly passed out. Later, I felt my body being carried away. It must be you who arrived. In other words, after you gouged out the eyeball, I never saw it again. Li Nijing asked suspiciously. I smiled bitterly and shook my head. I'm not even sure if I gouged out the eyeball. You know, everything was chaotic at the time, and I lost a lot of blood in my shoulder. I thought I was going to die, so I didn't have time to care about anything else. Why did you gouge out that eyeball instead of stabbing the dog's vital organs with a knife? Zheng Ruijuan asked this crucial question. I looked at Li Nijing and smiled bitterly. You can ask Li Nijing about this. When Lin Wanru's body appeared, I noticed that the blood-red eye was strange. It gave me a lot of fear and shock. I even carved an unfinished wooden eyeball because of it. Li Nijing knows this too. Zheng Ruijuan looked at Li Nijing, who nodded. No. So when I was being chased by the vicious dog, I grabbed the curved knife and almost instinctively stabbed at that eyeball. That's my confession. The investigators are obviously more concerned about the whereabouts of the blood-red eye, but that's not within my consideration. I only know that so far I have obtained two strange entities. One is a red soldier, and the other is a blood-red eye. After talking for a while, the investigation team left, leaving Xiong Wei to come to my bedside. Captain Xiong, you also know about ghosts. Before Xiongwei could speak, I asked first. Xiongwei nodded. I'm from the homicide team. In the process of handling cases, I have encountered some strange events. Does every homicide case involve a ghost? I asked curiously. Xiongwei smiled and said, where would there be so many ghosts? I rarely encounter them. And you just heard Zhao Wenba say that. Even members of the special case investigation team didn't quite believe these strange events were related to ghosts. I nodded, understanding. Although it can't be completely confirmed at the moment, let's just call it a ghost for now. A scene of bloodshot eyes crawling through the optic nerve flashed in my mind. I wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps it was some kind of strange power or a mutation of accumulated resentment. In short, even the investigation team couldn't be sure, so I couldn't find the answer for the time being. Sigh. The series of encounters these past few days had left me exhausted. Feeling sleepy, I closed my eyes to rest. You should take good care of your injuries first until they find the strange eyeball that Li Naijin mentioned. You must always be careful. Xiongwei saw that I wanted to sleep and took out a red hard-covered certificate from his briefcase. This is a Good Citizen Award certificate issued to you by the Public Security Bureau. The bonus is 10,000 yuan, which will be directly deposited into your account as a reward for helping the Public Security Bureau catch the Xiongwei laughed and put the certificate on the bedside table, reminding me to take it with me when I was discharged from the hospital. I've lost too much blood. Just rest a bit longer. The wound isn't serious. I thanked him casually. My hospitalization expenses are covered by the Public Security Bureau, so you don't need to worry, Xiongwei replied. Then I'm relieved. I breathed a sigh of relief. It's impossible not to worry about such expensive medical bills when you're rerunning a small business. Is my door closed? Suddenly, a doorbell rang. Xiongwei smiled and said, yes, it's closed. We even had our Public Security Bureau's partner replace your security door and bedroom door locks. The key will be delivered by tomorrow at the latest. Thank you. I patted my chest. My obsessive-compulsive disorder instantly vanished, and I closed my eyes and fell asleep. When I woke up, I was alone in the ward. I was woken by the phone ringing. I picked up my phone and saw that it was Sheriff Ma Jinlong calling. I pressed the answer button and said familiarly, Brother Ma, is there any news? The voice on the other end of the phone was deep and easygoing. Yesterday, we repaired the surveillance video that was diagonally opposite the back of your community more than 3 years ago. I also had 2 colleagues watch the surveillance video all night. We found something suspicious. This should be the last footage of your girlfriend before she disappeared. Do you want me to send the video clip to your phone? Ma Jinlong is the deputy head of the police team in charge of my fiancé's disappearance case. He went to the missing persons team many times to investigate Yuan Sheng and became very familiar with everyone in the team. When all the leads went cold, the police had no choice but to notify Yuan Sheng to stop the search. Yuan Sheng fell into despair and died because of this news. But 2 months after I was reborn, Ma Jinlong contacted me again and said that he found a hidden surveillance camera that had been running for 3 years behind the community. The hard drive was severely damaged, and the technical team spent a long time repairing most of it. They just found the anomaly yesterday. Thank you, Brother Ma. Can you send it to me? I nodded, said a few words to Ma Jinlong, and then hung up the phone. Ma Jinlong had no idea that I'd been thinking about this for the past 2 days. I was dealing with the homicide squad and the special cases investigation team. Judging from his tone, the video surveillance seemed to be related to Yi Ting's disappearance, but only suspicious, not enough to be conclusive evidence. Not long after, my phone received a short, technically processed and repaired surveillance video. The surveillance angle was from a building diagonally behind my apartment, directly facing the bathroom window on the 4th floor of my rented apartment. The season in the video seemed to be winter. The window was open, and the figure of a long-haired woman was standing in front of it. It was Yi Ting's blurry figure. Her lips were moving, as if she was talking to the air outside the window. Seeing this scene, I couldn't help but feel a little horrified, and the repressed longing from my original memories surged again with his figure. A short while later, Yi Ting by the window clearly shook his head and said a few more words. Then the situation became terrifying. He suddenly turned his head slightly, casting his gaze towards the surveillance camera. His handsome face seemed to be piercing through the camera, staring intently at me as I watched the video. My heart skipped a beat, and my phone vibrated sharply. Sheriff Ma Jinlong called. I answered, and Ma Jinlong asked, have you seen the video? I immediately replied, yes. Yi Ting's behavior was indeed very unusual. How did he discover the surveillance cameras here? Discover what? Ma Jinlong asked. The surveillance cameras? I just saw him in the video looking up at the camera, as if he were looking at me. Ma Jinlong's voice became startled, interrupting me. I don't know what you're talking about. This video. I watched the video. I watched Yi Ting. He was staring at. He spoke into the air, not looking anywhere else. My heart sank again. I asked, are you sure he didn't look in the direction of the security camera? Are you sure? He spoke a few words to the air outside the window, then closed it and never appeared again. Ma Jinlong said decisively, let me check again. You were just waking up when you called me. Maybe I saw it wrong. I said, quickly hanging up the phone. The video on the screen continued playing. The bathroom window on the 4th floor was closed, and Yi Ting was nowhere to be seen. I played the video again from the beginning. This time, I saw Yi Ting speak a few words to the air and then reach out to close the window. Just as Ma Jinlong said, he never appeared again. The scene of him looking up at me had completely disappeared. I felt the temperature around me drop sharply, and my hands and feet became cold. The empty single ward was now eerily silent. I didn't give up and played the video twice more. I didn't see Yi Ting looking up at me again. Could it be that what happened just now was just me? I thought it was just a hallucination, but no, it wasn't. Yi Ting was clearly watching me just now. When I get back, I need to go to the bathroom and check carefully to see if I can find any overlooked details. My fruitless search for life probably started off in the wrong direction. Judging from this video, Yi Ting's disappearance is definitely not an ordinary case. It should be investigated by the special case investigation team. I can take this opportunity to ask Li Naijin and the others to help find it. It will definitely be faster than the missing persons team. However, this is just my opinion. After all, I'm the only one who has noticed something strange about the video. I can get out of bed and walk around in 2 days. During this time, I called my old classmate Hong Anjia and learned that his father has fully recovered. The father and son are currently staying at their daughter's house in another state to relax. That's good. When I get home, I can free up a few days to remake a half-length wooden sculpture. I will send it to them when they return from their trip. I didn't tell Hong Anjia about my experience on the phone so as not to affect his trip. In the following days, Zhao Wenbo from the investigation team visited me once, saying that Zheng Ruijuan and Lin Nijing were dealing with a difficult case and couldn't spare the time. This made me even more curious and suspicious of this world. In the original owner's memory, this world was exactly the same as the Earth before her rebirth, but ever since I encountered two identical red soldiers, my worldview began to be overturned. After staying in the hospital for an extra week, I was finally discharged and went home. That night, I encountered a mangy dog, and my mental antibody level dropped to a freezing point. It hasn't shown any signs of increasing since. It seems that I can only increase it by focusing on the target that has absorbed the shadow. Otherwise, the value cannot recover naturally. However, I believe that if it weren't for the mental antibody resisting me that day, I would never have been able to contend with that blood-red eye for so long, let alone achieve a counterattack. When I got to my door, the lock was brand new. I turned the new key twice and opened it. I opened the Picasso Atom lock and pushed open the heavy security door. I opened all the windows to let in some fresh air, and the lock seemed to provide better protection. I couldn't help but marvel at how secure it was. Of course, I later realized that for those supernatural beings, and even investigators, the lock made no difference. Because the sheriff had intervened, and the homeowner, Babu, had downplayed the haunted house incident, they didn't give me any trouble and agreed to renew the lease at the original price. I didn't feel guilty either after all. Compared to the two dark figures locked in the wooden carving and the fact that someone had died in the house, it was nothing. After ventilating for a while, I went to the bathroom shown in the video of night listening, opened the window, and leaned out. Looking in the direction of the surveillance camera, I saw an old building of about 20 stories and a row of common low-rise houses across the street. I couldn't see anything unusual, and I couldn't be sure if the camera there was still there. I wondered what night listening was saying to the air. Perhaps I could find a lip-reading expert to try and identify it. I frowned, closed the window, and went back to the bedroom to re-watch the video. Night listening in the video never looked up, it was just talking to the air. Then I closed the window and cleaned the workbench. I placed the wooden carvings of Hongbing and Shuetong side by side in front of me, staring intently at the mental antibody progress bar under the corner of one of their eyes. It began to slowly increase. I estimated that the antibody level was around 5. When encountering something strange, the antibody would be randomly consumed based on the degree of contact, thus reducing mental damage. Currently, Shuetong's mental damage seemed far stronger than Jia Hongbing's. Then, I turned my attention to the second progress bar, called physical strength, which currently displayed as 52. After absorbing Jia Hongbing's characteristics, the strength of my index finger had been strangely enhanced. If it weren't for this, I probably wouldn't have lasted even a minute against a sneak attack from the murderer. Thank goodness. As for the third item, the previous skill, it was still empty, but the bloodline was very likely to have the previous skill. After all, its mental damage was far superior to Jia Hongbing's. These three attributes were definitely my trump cards when facing something strange. I wasn't afraid of ghosts, I was only worried about how to survive after encountering one. After staring at the wooden carving for a while, I found that the mental antibody recovery speed was a few minutes faster when staring at Shuetong than when staring at Hong. Then came the familiar drowsiness. I looked away, opened my phone's notepad, and created two new documents, named Jia Hongbing and bloodline named Jia Hongbing number 01. Characteristic description. This anomaly can replicate itself to become identical to a human, replacing their life. It mostly remains silent, but can indirectly control the true red soldiers, making it difficult for ordinary people to distinguish between the real and the fake. My intuition tells me that I will likely encounter these strange occurrences again in the future. My fiancée Yiting's disappearance, coupled with the events of the past few days, is definitely not so. Next, I entered the second piece of information. Name, bloodline number. 02 characteristic description. B characteristic description. A bloodline that can move on its own, seemingly possessing thought. Originally belonging to the deceased Lin Wanru, it mutated after death and moves using the optic nerve. Currently known, the ability to control a body by occupying the eye sockets of humans or animals is suspected to be possession. Other characteristics are being explored. The strength of the characteristic is being investigated. Just after I finished inputting the data, that familiar silver text suddenly flashed through my mind. I immediately looked inward and was stunned. The current understanding level of the bloodline characteristic is 70%. The understanding level has actually increased. I didn't expect that just sorting out and guessing would increase the progress by 20. That is to say, I now have a great deal of mastery over the bloodline. I saved the document and focused my attention on the blood-eyed target again. Not long after, drowsiness came over me. I climbed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. I slept until the sun was high in the sky. The weather was nice. As long as I didn't move much, I could barely feel the pain in my shoulder. I carefully stretched. Just after I finished washing up and was about to go out for breakfast, Sheriff Xiongwei called. The man on the other end of the phone sounded energetic and asked with a laugh, "Still not up?" I replied, "Yes, I'm about to go out for breakfast." "Did you notice anything unusual when you got home?" Xiongwei sounded concerned. I shook my head. "No, I slept quite well last night." "That's good." Xiongwei seemed to be jogging. "I have good news for you. The 10,000 yuan bonus has just been deposited into your account. You should receive a text message notification soon." Hearing that the money had arrived, I immediately perked up. "Thank you. Yes, we should thank you." Xiongwei chuckled. "Originally, our team leader said we were going to hold a case briefing and have you go on stage to receive your commendation and bonus. But considering that this case is related to the special investigation team, we simplified everything. Actually, I just stumbled upon this by chance and got lucky," I said, embarrassed. I paused and asked, "By the way, Commander Xiong, did you also? Do you remember Lin Wanru's daughter, Feifei?" Xiongwei asked with some regret. "Of course I remember her. The little girl is quite pitiful." Lin Feifei had already been sent to Qiguang Orphanage by our Public Security Bureau. We checked and found that the mother and daughter have no other relatives. Feifei mentioned this before, saying that she didn't even know who her father was. I haven't seen that precocious and sensible little girl since the incident. I really miss her. We originally thought we could find Feifei's father, but after the investigation, we learned that even Lin Wanru herself didn't know who he was. Xiongwei continued. I couldn't help but gasp. I was stunned for a few seconds. Lin Wanru's tall, voluptuous, and fashion-conscious appearance flashed through my mind. It seems that her love life is not simple. Otherwise, she wouldn't have fallen into this situation. Killing her would end in such a tragic way. I hesitated for a moment before asking, "Could I go to the orphanage to see Feifei?" "Sure, why not?" Xiongwei on the other end of the phone seemed to have stopped running and continued. "After his mother's accident, this little girl has been waking up in terror from nightmares for the past few nights. We were thinking of finding someone familiar to comfort her and talk to her, hoping it would help her rebuild her mental state as quickly as possible." He paused, then added, "Plus, the murderer who killed his mother was exposed because of you. You and Lin Feifei's family are quite connected." "All right, I'll go to Chiguang Orphanage to see her these next couple of days. I nodded and hung up. I ate breakfast downstairs, took a walk, and then went back inside to prepare to redo a red satin half-length wooden frame. I need to keep this finished piece for research. I can only carve another one using the wood I brought back from the shop before, so I can report back to Hong Anjia and his son when they return from their trip. I like to use a round blade chisel and a flat blade chisel to polish the facial features little by little. I really enjoy this calming process. For large area repairs, I go straight to an electric dental drill. Although it produces more foam and is more suitable for large pieces, it's not only troublesome to hang, but it's also noisy. It's not as quiet and flexible as a dental drill. Things happen too suddenly. I need time to adjust. I remember that before I transmigrated, the laws on Earth seem to require that the age difference between the adoptive parents and the adoptee be greater than 40 years, otherwise the application would be rejected. But this world doesn't have such a rule. The current law doesn't have such a provision. Both parties must be genuinely willing, and the adoptive parents must be mentally healthy, have no criminal record, and be able to create a good living and growth environment before submitting an adoption application to the city hall. Looking at it this way, the world before my rebirth was full of malice, while this world is much simpler. I weighed my own economic situation. I've been like this since graduating from university. The money I saved when I was with Yiting was all spent on searching for him when he went missing. I have almost no savings now, but to my surprise, Lin Feifei's mother left him nearly 100,000 yuan. Now that I've adopted him, I really can't say who's benefiting. Of course, this money can only be used for his living and growing expenses. As I left the room and closed the door, Feifei immediately climbed onto the chair by the window and knelt on it, his eyes fixed on the children chasing and playing outside. He was quiet and well-behaved, much more mature than his peers. At this moment, volunteer Song Xiaoyu was standing in the hallway outside the door, scratching his head incessantly. His loose bun was scratching his scalp with his fingernails, making a rubbing sound. When he saw me come out, he lowered his hands and gave me an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, I don't know what's wrong with my head lately. It's itchy and I have a lot of dandruff," he explained, quickly tying his hair back up. As we went downstairs, I took the opportunity to ask about the procedures for adopting Lin Feifei. Song Xiaoyu was very pleased that Lin Feifei would have a good home. He answered very carefully, including submitting an adoption application, submitting proof of identity, income, assets, and no criminal record. He escorted me all the way to the orphanage gate before saying goodbye and returning. I mentally reviewed the adoption materials. I glanced back at Song Xiaoyu, who was heading back to the building, and saw him scratching his head again. Back in my rented room, after dinner, I picked up the blood I would carving from my workbench. While working on the shadows inside, I began carving the latter half of the eye's nerves, tracing the lines and veins. As I worked, I kept recalling the moment that blood I jumped onto my arm like an octopus. A feeling of nausea would occasionally rise within me, but it was precisely this feeling that made my carving of the nerves more delicate and fluid. Every line seemed to come alive, like wriggling tentacles. Around 1 a.m., the blood I would carving was finally finished. I felt like I was looking at my own child, my eyes filled with. After staring at it for a while, I finally climbed into bed. At this point, I realized my mental antibody level was maxed out, reaching the highest level 5. The progress bar stopped increasing and became a black bar. With this level of mental antibody, I'm confident I can handle any anomalies now. Of course, this only applies to mental anomalies. If the anomaly's physical attack is strong, I'll need to rely on my equally enhanced body and the strange power in my hands to deal with it. In the Jujia Garden community, Song Hao and his wife and Li Fin went to bed at 11 p.m. as usual. After a busy day, Song Xiaoyu quickly climbed into bed, looked at his phone for a while, then turned off the light and went to sleep. Around 1 a.m., just as he was feeling sleepy, he woke up with an unbearable itch on his scalp. He had been scratching it constantly in his sleep until his nails hurt his skin, which finally jolted him awake. He had never felt so itchy before. Song Xiaoyu scratched his head and sat up, turning on the bedside lamp and heading to the bathroom. Standing in front of the mirror, he tilted his head and examined his scalp closely. It wasn't broken, but it was still incredibly itchy. He felt his entire head go numb and dared not scratch any further. He could only gently pat the back of his head. This torment made it impossible for him to fall back asleep. Just then, he felt something fall off the back of his head. It seemed to be a clump of hair. He reached out and grabbed it. Sure enough, it was a piece of scalp with a few strands of hair attached, only about 2 fingers long. He quickly checked the back of his head to see if a piece was missing. Upon closer inspection, he found it perfectly fine, indicating that the shed scalp and hair were likely due to natural metabolism. The itching had already lessened considerably after the scalp fell off, and was still gradually subsiding. Relieved, Song Xiaoyu casually tossed the dry scalp and hair into the wastebasket next to the toilet. After straightening his long hair and feeling no more itching, he turned off the light, went back to bed, and slept soundly. About 10 minutes later, in the darkness of the bathroom, the piece of dry scalp with hair attached in the wastebasket suddenly moved. After a moment, his seemingly completely dry scalp, like thin skin, slowly smoothed out. In the middle of the night, Song Xiaoyu suddenly woke up again. This time, it wasn't because his scalp was itchy, but because he was awakened by a strange sound. In the dead of night, he vaguely heard a laugh. Song Xiaoyu groggily turned over, his head tilted back, still feeling very sleepy. He felt he hadn't had such a comfortable sleep in a long time. He chuckled. Just then, the sound rang out again. Almost asleep, Song Xiaoyu heard it clearly this time. A sudden shock jolted him awake. He opened his eyes abruptly, everything was pitch black. He immediately reached for the bedside lamp, its pale yellow light dispelling the darkness. Song Xiaoyu immediately sat up, his eyes wide, scanning the area around the bed. Finding nothing amiss, he suspected he'd misheard, but upon closer reflection, the sound resembled a person laughing clearly. It couldn't be a mistake. Sitting on the bed, stunned for a moment, he heard no further noise. The light gave him a sense of security, and his fear slowly subsided. He reassured himself that it was probably a dream, mistaking the sound in his dream for reality. Picking up his phone, he checked the time. It was already 4 a.m. Song Xiaoyu initially wanted to turn off the light and continue sleeping, but felt a slight bloating in his lower abdomen. Reluctantly, he dragged his slippers into the bathroom. The instant he entered, he seemed to hear a faint murmur, but the sound immediately disappeared as he walked. Suspecting a mouse or cockroach standing at the door, he carefully looked around. Zhou showed no signs of anything amiss. He wanted to go to the living room bathroom, but was too scared to go out, even more afraid of waking his parents in their bed. After confirming everything was all right, he mustered his courage and sat down on the toilet, glancing left and right repeatedly, afraid a rat or cockroach might scurry out from the corner and crawl onto his feet. As he looked around, his gaze inadvertently swept over the wastebasket next to the toilet, and his body trembled slightly. He remembered throwing his dry scalp and long hair into it earlier. Now the scalp was gone, and only a few strands of hair were visible beneath the waste paper. He hadn't thrown any paper in since. So how could it be buried under the waste paper? Just as he was making this wild guess, his eyes widened suddenly, staring intently at the wastebasket. The scraps of paper covering the long hair began to move slowly, as if something underneath was turning over. After a moment, the scraps of paper rolled down, revealing a large amount of long, black hair. This hair was fluffy and messy, and its quantity had increased significantly. It was no longer the original strand of black hair that slowly slid up. A familiar laugh, hee, came from her face and mouth. This scene made Song Xiaoyu, who was in extreme fear, tremble instinctively. Before she could scream, her consciousness rapidly faded. Time passed second by second. Song Hao was shaken awake by his wife, Enlifen. He thought his snoring had disturbed his wife and was about to turn over and go back to sleep when Enlifen shook his arm again. Song Hao, still sleepy, asked in a slightly annoyed tone, "What are you doing?" Enlifen's voice was very low and close. She whispered in his ear, "There was someone in our bedroom just now." Song Hao was startled. His sleepiness instantly vanished. Who? He looked around. The bedroom was dim, and he couldn't see anything more than a meter away from the bed. He didn't quite believe his wife could have seen that person. Clearly they had been standing by their bed the whole time. Enlifen's body trembled slightly, her voice shaking. "I dare not move. I can only pretend to be asleep." Song Hao felt terrified and quickly sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. The two immediately scanned the bedroom, but saw no one. Maybe a thief broke in, Song Hao guessed, his expression shifting. He wondered if his daughter was all right. He immediately stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and gripped it tightly. He handed it to Enlifen, saying, "Here's your phone." He then quickly walked to the door, only to find that the bedroom door, which had been closed, was now ajar. Song Hao's heart pounded. Just as he was about to pull the door open, it was pushed open by Song Xiaoyu. With a pale face, she hurried in. "Dad, I'm scared. I think I had a nightmare." Song Hao immediately hugged her. He glanced down the hallway and, finding nothing amiss, breathed a sigh of relief. He asked, "Did you see any thieves in the house?" Song Xiaoyu shook her head. Song Hao turned to Enlifen and said, "Are you sure you didn't see wrong?" Enlifen stared at Song Xiaoyu for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I was mistaken." "It's all right, Xiaoyu. Go back to your bedroom first. Dad will go through each room to check." After watching his daughter return to her room, Song Hao checked every room in the house and verified that all the locks were intact and hadn't been opened. By this time, Song Xiaoyu was already lying in bed, seemingly asleep. Song Hao closed the door for her and returned to the master bedroom. He lay down. "There's no one else in the house. You might have been half asleep and mistaken me," he muttered as he pulled the blanket over her head. Suddenly, he noticed that Enlifen was trembling and looked at him in surprise. Enlifen stammered, "I was only sure after seeing Xiaoyu that he was standing by our bedside before you woke up." 2 days later, Hong Anja returned from his trip with his father, Hong Bin. As soon as he got home, he called me to invite me to dinner, firstly to thank me, and secondly to pick up the custom-made half-body wooden sculpture. I had already prepared the second sculpture. The dinner was set for 7 p.m. at the Moonlit Pavilion restaurant in the Old City. The Hong family father and son arrived at the restaurant early and ordered a sumptuous meal. In the private room, I ate while asking about Hong Bin's health. Hong Bin was in a good mood and had fully recovered, no longer exhibiting the previous abnormal behavior. After eating for a while, I opened the video from the Public Security Bureau and handed it to Hong Anja. This is the last footage of night listening that the Public Security Bureau found. I quickly checked to see if there was anything noteworthy. I did this to test whether Hong Anja would also see that strange scene when watching the video. To prevent the two of them from watching at the same time and causing the strange situation to occur, I stopped Hong Bing, who was curiously crouched over. "Uncle Hong, wait until Anja finishes watching before showing it to you." Hong Bing nodded, smiled broadly, clinked glasses with me, and drank it all in one gulp. It seems that this old man is in good physical condition. If he hadn't been worn down by Jia Hongbin recently, he wouldn't be able to faint at any time. I had been observing Hong Anja. When he was halfway through the video, his brows furrowed, clearly incredulous. When the video ended, he still held the phone, remained motionless, and looked up at me. "Do you have any other videos?" I said, "No." I shook my head. "You should replay the video for Uncle Hong first, and then we'll talk." I was afraid that if he spoke first, it would give Hong Bing a psychological suggestion. Hong Bing took the phone and watched it seriously. I have to say, the expressions of the father and son watching the video were exactly the same. After Hong Bing finished watching, I took the phone and asked, "What do you think is the strangest part of the video?" Hong Anjia said, "When Yiting was talking to the air outside the window and was also gesturing." "I don't understand this at all." Hong Anjia and I were college classmates. He knew Yiting's personality well. This abnormal behavior was indeed unbelievable. Hong Bin asked in surprise, "Is this girl talking to thin air?" I thought she was shouting at someone in the opposite building, but judging from the way she speaks, she doesn't seem to be speaking loudly. "Is there anything else?" I asked. "No." Hong Anja shook his head. "It seems like Yeting is talking to someone, but making such a gesture towards the window is strange." I nodded calmly. Neither of them saw it. The strange scene I saw before, only I have seen it in the video. Yeting suddenly looked at the camera. "After this video was taken, has he appeared anywhere else?" Hong Anja asked with concern. "No," I said, slightly disappointed. I put away my phone. "This is his last video." After this, the video on the street facing the gate of the Evergreen Ivy community didn't show him leaving. He just disappeared like that. Could he have left in disguise? Hong Bin guessed. Yes, if he left the community gate at night and immediately got into a car parked on the street, there's a high chance he wouldn't be discovered. Hong Anja nodded. I shook my head. I've checked the surveillance footage. During that time, no one came out of the community gate and got into a car and left immediately. There were people whose faces I couldn't see coming in and out. But after careful examination, the sheriff found that he matched everyone else in the neighborhood and wasn't a stranger. Could it be that he impersonated someone else in the neighborhood and then left again? Hong Anjie continued to speculate. I didn't refute this, but lowered my head in deep thought. I didn't rule out this possibility, but if Yi Tingzhen did this, what would his motive be? Why would he hide himself? The three of them discussed this, but their doubts only increased. The atmosphere at the dinner table became somewhat tense. To break the silence, I took out the wrapped wood carving and opened it in front of Hong Bing, saying, "My craftsmanship is not very good." Good. Hong Bing blurted out a single word, Hong Anjia. It's so realistic. It feels much more realistic than what I've seen before, I exclaimed. I smiled and said, I'll edit it later. Impressive. Hong Bing gave me a thumbs up. I really like it. Hong Anjia immediately transferred 1,000 yuan more than I had ordered. I was slightly taken aback and was about to speak when Hong Anjia brought up my father's matter. I was just about to thank you, but this is nothing. Don't refuse. I nodded and didn't say anything more. The dinner party didn't end until almost 10 p.m. All three of us were slightly tipsy. The Hong family father and son called a designated driver, and I walked alone towards the Evergreen Ivy community diagonally opposite. The night breeze made my thoughts calm. When I reached the entrance of the Evergreen Ivy community, I looked up at the shops across the street and the 2 surveillance cameras on the street. The apartment was functioning normally, but the security footage I reviewed didn't show Yi Ting leaving through the main gate. Did he leave from somewhere else, as Hong Anjia claimed? Or was he disguised as another resident? Or was I just staring through the iron fence at the gate? Or did he never leave at all? After showering back at my rented apartment, I compulsively checked all the doors, windows, and locks before returning to my bedroom. Since the ghost child incident, my obsessive-compulsive symptoms seem to have worsened. This is probably a sign of extreme vigilance. Now, when I come home at night, I check the locks 3 times before closing my bedroom door, locking it, and thoroughly checking every possible hiding place in the house. Lying in bed, I felt reassured after completing these compulsive actions and slept soundly until dawn, no longer harboring any suspicions. The next morning, I went to the audiobook shop as usual. Although the sales of the anime-themed wooden carvings were good, the profits mainly came from volume. The truly exquisite pieces were still those by artists like Jia Hongbin. I hadn't sold a single carving that morning. Around noon, I simply closed the shop, gathered all the necessary documents, and went to the Civil Affairs Department of the City Hall to submit the application to adopt Feifei. I submitted it anyway. Even though this situation was rare, and I guessed it would most likely not be approved, I could only leave it to fate. As I left the Civil Affairs Department, my phone suddenly rang. It turned out to be Qiguang Orphanage. I was stunned for a moment. I pressed the button, and it was approved. It couldn't be this fast, could it? After answering the phone, there was a pause. I was scared. Then I answered the phone, and a strange male voice came through. Hello, is this Mr. Shin Xian? Yes, it is. Please wait a moment. Lin Feifei wants to say a few words to you. Soon, a familiar, childish voice came from the other end of the phone. Uncle Shun, where are you now? I heard that his tone was off. I replied in confusion. I'm on the street. What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? No. Feifei suddenly lowered her voice, as if she was deliberately avoiding the people around her. I whispered, do you have time? Could you come over here? I feel like Sister Xiao is acting strangely. I paused for a moment before realizing. Are you talking about that volunteer, Song Xiao? Today is her volunteer day again. No, it wasn't supposed to be today, but he came, and he seemed very strange. Feifei seemed a little frightened. They didn't believe I just saw him. Could you come over? I said, okay, I'll be right there. I hung up and immediately took a taxi to Qiguang Orphanage. Half an hour later, I arrived at the orphanage gate. As if I had been notified, I registered smoothly and entered the building. It was unusually quiet inside. All the other children were in another building for classes. Only one male volunteer on duty greeted me. This male volunteer said, Feifei didn't attend any classes this afternoon. He has been staying in his dormitory and hasn't come out. I finally managed to persuade him to go out for a walk, and he insisted on calling you. My phone was dead, so he went to the office building to call you. I nodded and asked, do you know why he didn't go to class? The male volunteer shrugged and said, he has a stomachache and refuses to take medicine. That was definitely an excuse, but I didn't want to call him out on it. You know, Feifei is actually very sensible. He wouldn't skip class for no reason. Who did he meet? I asked the male volunteer. He thought for a moment and said, it seems to be Xiaoyu. Another volunteer brought Xiaoyu over. It's not his turn to work today. I don't know why he came. They talked. I asked again. The male volunteer nodded. Probably, I said, but I didn't see him. Where is Song Xiaoyu now? I turned around and looked around. I didn't know if he had already left. I walked to the door of room 307. The male volunteer knocked on the door and said, Feifei, Uncle Shun is here. Can we come in? Please come in. Feifei's childish voice came from inside. The male volunteer pushed open the door and pulled the doorknob. He said to Feifei on the bed, do I need to come in? I want to talk to Uncle Shun alone. I'm sorry, big monster, Feifei said. Seeing my surprised look, the male volunteer explained apologetically, that's my nickname here. All the kids call me that. I smiled. The male volunteer, nicknamed Big Monster, gently closed the door and left. Lin Feifei immediately jumped off the bed, ran over, and grabbed my hand. Uncle Shun. Feifei's expression showed undisguised fear. Her composure while sitting on the bed was obviously an act. What happened? I squatted down and asked in confusion. Sister Xiaoyu suddenly came today, and it seems like she came intentionally or unintentionally. And she seemed to be intentionally or unintentionally getting closer to me. Feifei, I asked. Did you ask her why? Feifei nodded. I asked, and she said she missed me a little. Then what? Then she just kept looking at me and smiling. Feifei suddenly shivered. Actually, Sister Xiaoyu's smile is very sweet, but today her smile suddenly made me feel scared. I couldn't help but ask her what she was smiling about. What did she answer? She said she wasn't smiling. Feifei shivered again and asked me, can you imagine her still smiling when she answered me? She paused, her expression terrified. Feifei hugged me tightly again. Uncle Shun, I'm scared. As for Sister Xiaoyu, did you tell the other volunteers or teachers about my sister's strange behavior? I asked, frowning. At that moment, I could clearly feel that Feifei's trembling in my arms wasn't fake. Before, I had suspected that he was trying to evoke my pity by showing weakness. After all, this child's thinking was far beyond his age. But now I was sure he was really scared. Feifei returned, and I told the teacher's office, but they didn't believe me. Because Sister Xiaoyu had also talked to them, which was normal. At that time, he didn't laugh. Is Song Xiaoyu gone? I asked. Feifei shook his head and didn't know. I had just pretended to have a stomachache and kept the big monster in the room with me. Maybe he realized I wasn't alone, so he left. It's okay, it's okay. I patted his shoulder to comfort him. Besides smiling at you, has Sister Xiaoyu done anything else unusual? No, Fei Fei replied. I carried her back to bed and poured a glass of hot water. To distract her, I whispered, I've submitted the adoption application to the city hall. Let's see if it can be approved. Fei Fei's eyes lit up and became much more lively. Really? She asked. She clasped her hands together and placed them on her chest, looking expectant, hoping it would be approved soon so I could leave this place. I smiled slightly and flicked the tip of her nose, but her skin felt a little cold. Was she catching a cold? I touched her forehead and asked. Fei Fei shook her head. She was probably too scared earlier. I helped her lie down, covered her with the blanket, and chatted for a while to calm her down. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. The big monster poked his head in and smiled, saying, Mr. Shun, your visiting time is over. I'm sorry. After I reminded him, he tactfully closed the door and left. You should get some sleep first. When I leave, I'll tell the big monster to keep an eye on things here. I said to Fei Fei. Fei Fei grabbed the edge of the blanket, pulled it up slightly, only her eyes showing, and nodded. Her bright eyes watched me close the door. The door opened, and the quiet corridor outside had already gone downstairs. I glanced back, and then continued down. Just as I reached the corner of the stairs on the second floor, I caught a glimpse of a figure in a light blue volunteer uniform walking into the right-hand corridor on the second floor. The woman was thin, with loose hair, and her back looked extremely familiar. I was slightly taken aback. My first thought was Song Xiaoyu. He hadn't left yet. I looked up towards room 307 on the third floor. What if this person really was Song Xiaoyu? What if he went upstairs to find Fei Fei again after I left? The little girl was already quite frightened. I decided to follow her and see what would happen. He really wanted to ask Fei Fei directly why she had scared her. Walking down the second floor corridor, the entire building was deathly silent. For some reason, the second floor was noticeably dimmer than the third. The further I went, the darker it became. I couldn't find the light switch, so I silently made my way to the end of the corridor, stepping on the carpet. Before me was a door with the words, wardrobe, written on it. The figure that resembled Song Xiaoyu had just disappeared in this direction. I stood at the door and looked back, but still saw no one else. I gently pushed open the wardrobe door. It creaked open. The door wasn't locked. Inside was a dimly lit passageway. I stepped inside. Song Xiaoyu, I said as I walked. I called out to avoid startling him if he suddenly appeared, but no one answered. Could it really not be him? I crossed the corridor and entered the spacious cloak. I immediately saw Song Xiaoyu's thin figure standing in front of one of the metal cabinets. The cabinet door was wide open, completely obscuring his head. He stood there ramrod straight, his hands hanging down, motionless, as if staring intently into the cabinet. Song Xiaoyu, is that you? I took 2 steps forward and called out again. He remained unmoved. The atmosphere became eerie at that moment. Could it really be, as Fei Fei said, that something was wrong with him? If the Song Xiaoyu before me had become abnormal like Han Bing back then, I need to slowly deduce his characteristics. The thought had barely formed when a line of silver-white text suddenly into my mind. Unknown anomaly. Current characteristics. Understanding level. 0. Seeing this, I froze. The information, though brief, confirmed my guess. The person before me, resembling Song Xiaoyu, was indeed an anomaly. Since my understanding of him was 0, immediately carving a wooden sculpture to contain him was too late. Not to mention he might just be possessed. Since I was certain he was something evil, I didn't intend to confront him head on. If Song Xiaoyu himself was in danger, I didn't know how to resolve this without harming him. It was best to retreat and find Li Nijing from the investigation team to handle it. Having made up my mind, I took a few steps back. Just then, the motionless Song Xiaoyu suddenly began to slowly turn around. I was startled and quickly retreated to the aisle. He had completely turned around. His head was still blocked by the cabinet door. Only his neck and below were visible. A strange laugh rang out, completely unlike him. He raised his right foot, preparing to step forward. At the same time, the edge of the cabinet door revealed the tip of his nose, followed by 1/3 of his cheek. His lips strangely wrinkled, as if he were laughing. I didn't dare look closely and quickly retreated. Footsteps then sounded at the other end of the aisle. He followed me. His chilling laughter approached again. I flung open the door and rushed out. The second floor corridor remained quiet. Looking back, there was no movement at the cloakroom door. He seemed not to have followed. Glancing down the stairs, I saw the male volunteer, nicknamed Big Monster, coming up. Mr. Shin smiled and pointed to his watch. I was just about to come up to call you. Your visiting time is up. If you have anything else, you can come tomorrow. I nodded, but still worried, and said, could I go upstairs and say a few more words to Fei Fei? There's something I forgot to tell him, isn't there? The male volunteer went up to the second floor and, seeing me staring at the back of the corridor, also peered suspiciously. Just then, the walk-in closet door slammed shut. Who's there? The male volunteer asked as he walked over. Don't come any closer. I quickly warned him, but the more he listened, the more confused he became. Instead, he quickened his pace, rushed over, and pushed open the walk-in closet door, going inside. Damn it, I couldn't help but curse under my breath. Less than 10 seconds later, the door opened again, and the male volunteer came out. He spread his hands, looking puzzled. There's no one inside, he said. Why did you tell me not to go in? I was suddenly stunned. When I saw him earlier, my gaze had shifted away from behind me. Damn it. I immediately looked up at the third floor, exclaiming, oh no, come with me. The male volunteer looked puzzled. Seeing me running towards the third floor, he quickly followed. I rushed to the door of room 307 and pushed it open. The door froze instantly. The male volunteer behind me looked into the room, his eyes widening in shock. Song Xiaoyu was bent over by Lin Fei Fei's bedside, her long hair falling loose and obscuring her face. She was staring intently at the person on the bed, while Fei Fei huddled under the covers, trembling. I pushed the door open completely and stepped inside. Now we had 2 people on our side, and the male volunteer was burly and strong. If it really came down to a fight, we might not lose. Just as the thought crossed my mind, I turned around and saw the male volunteer had collapsed to the ground, motionless. At the same time, I noticed that the mental antibody progress bar in my field of vision was rapidly decreasing from level 5 to level 4, and it was still dropping. He wasn't cowardly, he had been attacked by Song Xiaoyu's mental. I'm so shocked, I thought, and forced myself to go inside. I grabbed a decorative vase from the table with one hand and yelled, Song Xiaoyu, come here. Song Xiaoyu slowly straightened up and turned his head. A smiling face came into view, but the smile was ridiculously fake, as if it were glued on, stiff, and unnatural. He stared at me, ignoring Fei Fei, and strode towards me. I gripped the bottle neck warily, ready to smash it at any moment, and immediately moved a few steps to the side. But he didn't even glance at me. He walked to the door, stepped over the male volunteer on the ground, and went straight downstairs. As he passed by me, I was horrified to find that under his disheveled hair, a large patch of skin on his neck was completely wrinkled, like a wet rag that had been forcibly wrung out. As his footsteps faded into the distance, I suddenly realized that his neck skin was so wrinkled. Could it be that his brain? The bag was turned 180 degrees, but the face looked exactly like a living person. Without time to think, I rushed to the bedside and gently lifted the blanket. Fei, don't be afraid, it's Uncle Sean. Fei was curled up, her face pale and covered in tears. He was startled and immediately sat up, hugging me tightly. Uncle Sean? He's here again. I know I chased him away just now. It's okay, don't be afraid. I reassured her while looking towards the door. The male volunteer seemed to be slowly waking up. Just then, I felt a tickle on the back of my head and subconsciously scratched it a few times. The male volunteer got up and immediately remembered what had happened. Seeing that we were all right, he breathed a sigh of relief. I said, he just went downstairs, but don't chase after him. Song Xiaoyu is acting strangely. The male volunteer felt a wave of fear and exclaimed, what are you doing? I'll call the sheriff. I took out my phone and called Li Nijing to explain. He happened to be with the team leader and, after confirming the situation, agreed to immediately bring people to handle it, telling me to wait for further instructions. The big monster walked up to Fei and said regretfully, Fei, are you alright? Fei shook her head. I don't know why. I suddenly fainted. This has never happened before. Luckily, you and Uncle Shen are here. Otherwise, who knows what that woman Song Xiaoyu might have done to you? The male volunteer muttered. I could see he was somewhat remorseful. After some comforting, he ran to report to the hospital's higher-ups. The hospital leaders were extremely shocked and immediately organized a search, but they hadn't found any trace of Song Xiaoyu yet. Soon after, 3 ordinary security officers in uniform arrived. At this time, the class ended, and children were returning to room 3071 after another. They were all timid when they saw me. The security officers asked me about Song Xiaoyu's attire, and then joined the search team. Around 6:30, Li Nijing called. He said he and team leader Zheng Ruijuan were waiting for me outside the gate. The orphanage had arranged for a dedicated nurse to take care of Fei 24 hours a day. After comforting Fei, I left the orphanage and went to the opposite side of the street. Li Nijing and Zheng Ruijuan were standing there. Zheng Ruijuan had messy hair and a thin build. He was smoking heavily and silently staring at me. As I approached, Li Nijing spoke first. The orphanage's security officer is someone we sent. They just gave us feedback on the search. They didn't find Song Xiaoyu in the orphanage. I guess she left a long time ago. Have you found her home address? I frowned and asked. Zheng and I just came from his house. No one was home. Song Xiaoyu didn't go back, and according to the information we have, she lives with her parents. The efficiency and power of the investigation team. It's obviously much bigger than I estimated. Besides what you told me on the phone, have you noticed anything else unusual about this woman named Song Xiaoyu? Li Nijing asked. Zheng Ruijuan, who had been silent, handed me a cigarette. I waved my hand and said thank you, I don't smoke. Zheng Ruijuan nodded, lit a new cigarette from the almost finished butt, and took a deep drag. I thought carefully for a moment and said, his neck was covered by long hair, but I still noticed that the skin on his neck seemed to be all twisted together. You mean there were wrinkles? Li Nijing asked. Yes, many wrinkles, like a tightly wrung rag. I nodded. Li Nijing glanced at Zheng Ruijuan, whose brows were furrowed, and continued, is there any other unusual behavior from Song Xiaoyu, such as her way of walking? I shook my head. Everything was normal except for that strange smile. Li Nijing said, you said on the phone that his smile looked like a fake face. I corrected her. To be precise, it's a very. The fake gave off an extremely unnatural feeling. He hadn't spoken at all from beginning to end. Zheng Ruijuan, who was smoking silently, suddenly asked, what do you mean? I thought for a moment and shook my head. No, but he would occasionally laugh. The laughter was basically the same, but it sounded creepy and very uncomfortable. Zheng Ruijuan asked again, when you were standing behind him, did he turn his head or turn around directly when he looked at you? This question was extremely tricky. After thinking carefully, I said with certainty, I wish I hadn't asked. Now that you've asked, I remember that Song Xiaoyu turned around to look at me twice. During this time, he never turned his head directly. Li Nijing looked at Zheng Ruijuan. Zheng Ruijuan stubbed out his cigarette and nodded to me. Based on your description just now, it's highly likely that there was an abnormal change in his neck. Could it be that someone who hanged him? Li Nijing made a bold guess at this moment, but stopped halfway through her sentence. She needed to see it with her own eyes to know. Zheng Ruijuan reached out and ruffled his messy hair a couple of times. I'll stake out Song Xiaoyu's house tonight. I'll call you if anything happens. He patted my shoulder. Kid, do you know why you keep running into these things? I shook my head. You have a special attraction for them. Zheng Ruijuan laughed. His smile seemed a bit carefree to me. According to the plan, Zheng Ruijuan went to Song Xiaoyu's house to stake out, while Li Nijing expanded the search area. I said what I needed to say and left alone. On the way home in a taxi, the evening breeze drifted in through the half-open car window, dispelling the gloom of my unusual experience at the orphanage. My mood slowly returned to calm. Just then, I felt a faint itch on the back of my head. I reached up and gently scratched it. A few seconds later, it itched again. I instinctively scratched it again. As soon as I put my hand down, I suddenly froze. The feeling was strangely familiar. Back home, I quickly cooked a packet of instant noodles to fill my stomach. Sitting at my workbench, I glanced at the progress bar of my mental antibody, which was currently at level 3. Song Xiaoyu's mental influence was truly formidable in just a short time. 2 of my 5 layers of antibodies had been worn away. If it weren't for the antibody supporting me, I probably would have fainted even faster than that male volunteer. I had to recover my mental antibody as quickly as possible. I chose to stare at the target with bloodshot eyes to accelerate the recovery. After staring for half an hour, my mental antibody was full, reaching level 4 and advancing towards level 5. As the intense drowsiness brought on by the side effects washed over me like a tidal wave, I could barely hold on and had to look away. Almost simultaneously, a sharp itch shot through the back of my head, like dozens of ants crawling on my scalp. I reflexively pulled my head back and scratched the back of my head vigorously, gasping in pain. Why was my scalp so itchy? After scratching vigorously, the intense itching began to subside. Looks like I need to change my shampoo, I thought. Just as I finished speaking, I suddenly shuddered. Song Xiao, I muttered to myself. Although the itching had disappeared, my body gradually went numb, as if I had fallen into an ice cell. I strongly suspected I was experiencing the strange thing Song Xiao had gone through. Without thinking, I took out my phone and created a third document in the Notepad app. I quickly typed in the name, Song Xiao, tentatively numbered 03. The description of the characteristic was, this anomaly, in the early stages of possession, causes the possessed person's scalp to itch. The symptoms are basically similar to those of scalp inflammation, leading people to mistake it for a skin disease. Other characteristics were under further investigation. The solution was, characteristic strength. I don't know the exact form of the target, I can only speculate. I need to increase the understanding level of the characteristic to over 80% to lock onto it. Just as I finished editing, that familiar silver text flashed in my mind. Unknown anomaly. Current characteristic understanding level, 20. I was overjoyed, but the next second I felt like I had fallen into an ice cave. The increased characteristic understanding level meant the speculation was correct. It could indeed cause the possessed person's scalp to itch. This indirectly meant I had already been possessed by this hidden evil. Even if I hadn't been possessed, at least the body was being targeted. I suppressed my panic and continued to add my speculation to the characteristic description. The characteristic description stated that in the early stages of possession, the possessed person would experience itchy scalp symptoms, similar to scalp inflammation, which could be mistaken for a skin disease. Moreover, if possession was successful or a new stage was entered, a symptom would cause numerous wrinkles to appear on the possessed person's neck. Other characteristics are under further investigation. As soon as I finished editing, the silver text immediately changed. Unknown anomaly. Current characteristic understanding level 30. No, I shook my head, staring at the edited text, and manually deleted the description of wrinkles on the neck. I changed it to the symptom that the possessed person's neck would be completely twisted, possibly even rotated. The silver text changed again. Unknown anomaly. Current characteristic understanding level 50. I was shocked. I hadn't expected that just by modifying this one speculation, my understanding of this thing would increase by 20. At this moment, my scalp started to itch slightly again. I immediately noticed it, but didn't reach out to scratch it. Instead, I gently touched the itchy scalp and hair with my index and middle fingers. This touch immediately made me feel something was wrong. I picked up a strand of hair that had noticeably grown longer and went to the bathroom mirror. Leaning to the side, I examined it closely and discovered that right where my scalp was itchy, a strand of hair was being pinched between my fingers. Something was causing the hair to grow rapidly. Was this a ghost or just hair? I had this question in my mind. If there was something wrong with my scalp, something was stuck in my skin, causing the hair in that area to grow faster than normal. But if there was nothing wrong with my scalp, could it just be the strangely long hair that was causing the itching? In my rented room, I sat at my desk, deep in thought. An ordinary person would have been terrified and rushed to the hospital after such a bizarre experience, but I remained unusually calm. 2 terrifying encounters in a row had strengthened my mental defenses considerably. I carefully pressed my scalp, and the itching subsided temporarily. I picked up my phone and, while observing the strangeness on the back of my head in the mirror, typed in my speculations about the characteristics of this long hair. Soon, I added new facts and speculations. The hair in that area would grow rapidly after the scalp itched, far exceeding the growth of normal hair. I didn't know how long it would grow or whether it would fall out. As I wrote this, I suddenly remembered Song Xiao always had long, flowing hair. When we first met, he had his hair down in a bun and was scratching his head incessantly outside Fei-Fei's door. He must have been experiencing this strange behavior for several days already. In other words, there must have been a buffer period between when my scalp first started itching and when I developed Song Xiao's bizarre appearance. Song Xiao herself had long hair, so she didn't notice the abnormality immediately. Therefore, I can infer that the length of my hair growth now shouldn't be too outrageous. Now, I'm wondering why my scalp is itchy and where this hair came from. Am I possessed by a ghost or cursed? From Hongbing being possessed by an evil spirit to Lin Wanru's pupils mutating due to a strange obsession, and now this itchy scalp seems to be contagious in some way. I wonder if Fei-Fei is alright, and whether the male volunteer who fainted at the door has also been infected. I've realized that no matter what, speculating on what this thing was, I found that no matter how I speculated, the percentage of its personality traits remained unchanged. After a moment of silence, I made one last, albeit limited, speculation. If the itching on my scalp and the hair growth continued unchecked, my body would eventually be completely controlled by a strange force, turning me into a walking corpse. After describing the characteristics, the silver text in my mind changed to unknown anomaly. Current characteristics understanding level 75. I was somewhat surprised. Looking inward at the text in my mind, I realized the speculation had gone so smoothly, almost completely stripping away this evil spirit, whether it was my scalp or hair, down to its underwear. Based on previous experience, a characteristic understanding level exceeding 80 could directly pinpoint Song Xiao, thus sparing me the same fate. Now, understanding the strangeness surrounding him was like peeling an onion layer by layer. If I could defeat and seal the opponent based solely on speculation, locking it up would have been fine. But unfortunately, no matter how I speculated, I couldn't make any progress. Even after taking out scissors and cutting off the strangely long hair at the back of my head, I returned to my bed. That night, worried that the itchy scalp would cause my body to undergo more mutations, I couldn't fall asleep at all. I sat on the bed, constantly thinking about what other characteristics this thing had. I sat there until 3 a.m. and finally made a decision. Then, I leaned against the pillow and carefully took a nap, preparing to act as soon as it was light the next day. That same night, in the garden opposite Unit 1, Building 7 of the Jiyuan residential area in the center of Yunga City, a man was squatting silently behind a bench. It was Zheng Ruejuan. In order to avoid scaring the residents passing by at night, Zheng Ruejuan chose to squat in a hidden, dark place, his eyes fixed on the 8th floor of Unit 1 opposite. Song Xiaoyu lived in number 82. She could be seen from the garden at a glance. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows, but the lights inside had never been turned on. Summer nights were teeming with mosquitoes, and Zheng Ruejuan had been thoroughly fed on them all night, his skin swollen with several large welts. Yet, he remained as steady as a rock, squatting from 8 p.m. until the sky began to light. He glanced at his 1982 Zheng brand watch. It was 5:30. Zheng Ruejuan frowned slightly. Although people had entered and exited the first unit all night, he had observed them carefully. Song Xiaoyu wasn't among them, and the lights on the 8th floor apartment had remained off. They hadn't returned. Where had this family gone? Just after 6 a.m., Zhang Ruijuan rubbed his numb legs and stood up. He went to the entrance of the first unit of Building 7 and found a security camera pointing directly at the door. After a moment's thought, he walked towards the property management office. Upon arriving at the office, he showed his identification. Hello, I'm a security officer in a case. I need to check your. The security guards were very cooperative and skillfully pulled up the surveillance footage from Qiguang Orphanage after closing time last night. They watched for about 20 minutes, during which approximately 20 people were seen entering and exiting. A few minutes later, a tall, slender woman in a light blue volunteer uniform appeared on screen. She opened the access control and walked into the stairwell without stopping. Zhang Ruijuan immediately spoke up, and the guard pressed the pause button. Zhang Ruijuan leaned closer to the screen and confirmed that the woman was indeed Song Xiaoyu, who had returned from the orphanage yesterday. Not only did she resemble Song Xiaoyu in figure and appearance, but she hadn't even changed out of her volunteer uniform. Sir, is this the woman you're looking for? The guard asked, pointing to the still frame. Song Xiaoyu asked Zhang Ruijuan, but Zhang Ruijuan didn't answer. At that moment, a thought that even he found hard to believe suddenly arose in his mind. After a moment, he looked up, somewhat surprised, and muttered to himself. Could it be that this family has been at home all along, just without turning on the lights? The property management staff on duty, not knowing what he was muttering, asked in confusion, do you want to continue watching the surveillance footage? Zhang Ruijuan nodded. Please adjust the surveillance footage to yesterday's speed 3x and browse this point to see if these two people appeared. He then took out 2 photos, one a recent photo of Song Xiaoyu's parents. The staff on duty took the photos, somewhat surprised, and asked, aren't you going to watch it with me? Zhang Ruijuan shook his head and went to Unit 1 of Building 7. Help me open the access card to the unit, then come back and continue watching the surveillance. I'm going to go up to the building where this family lives. The security guard took the general access card and led the way, curiously turning back to ask, Sir, has something happened to this family? Zhang Ruijuan smiled. 3 years ago, their dog, Wang Kai, bit their neighbor and insisted that the neighbor bit him. The neighbor didn't believe him and actually bit him, resulting in infection and death. Then the family fled with Wang Kai that night. The security guard was stunned for a long time before recovering and showing a puzzled expression. Is this neighbor CC? Maybe, probably. Zhang Ruijuan smiled helplessly. The usual practice of the Special Case Investigation Team is to control the scope of knowledge and not let it cause widespread panic among the general public. If the investigation shows that Song Xiaoyu's family is not abnormal, just clarify with the property management that they have the wrong person. The two arrived at Unit 1 of Building 7. The security guard opened the access card and pulled the door open, saying, Sir, if their Wang Kai is still here, I can go and bring Laifu from the security room over now. We might not lose to Wang Kai in a fight. Zhang Ruijuan was stunned for a moment and quickly waved his hand. No. He entered the building and looked back. The property management staff had already left. Ruijuan took the elevator to the 8th floor and stood before door 82. He looked down at the doorway, took a deep breath, and saw the dark stairwell diagonally opposite, from which he could faintly hear movement. He glanced around, but found nothing amiss. He then took out a gold-plated pen and knocked on the door. As a veteran sheriff in the Special Cases Investigation Team, Zhang Ruijuan knew the routines for handling such cases well. His mental control and courage far surpassed that of ordinary people. He wouldn't be easily swayed by mental distractions. After knocking twice, he heard unhurried footsteps from inside. The family had been there all along. The door opened, and a middle-aged man stood silently inside, holding the doorknob. The room was dark, and the figure was blurry. Zhang Ruijuan strained his eyes, raised his sheriff's badge, and said, Excuse me, is this Song Xiaoyu's house? Zhang Ruijuan asked. Yes, the man inside replied calmly. Sorry to wake you so early. Zhang Ruijuan smiled. The man inside said, It's all right, I'm already up. What can I do for you? I need to speak with Song Xiaoyu about something related to Qiguang Orphanage. Zhang Ruijuan said, Come in. He took a step back and turned on the light at the door. Only then did Zhang Ruijuan finally see the man's face clearly. He was about to step inside when he paused slightly. The middle-aged man was smiling at him, but the smile was fake. His features were stiff, and the corners of his mouth were upturned. What was most unsettling was that the man seemed to have been maintaining this smile while staring at him in the dark. The thought sent chills down his spine. The middle-aged man stopped smiling, turned, and walked into the house. Come in. You don't need to change your shoes, Zhang Ruijuan said hesitantly as he entered. His nose wrinkled slightly. The curtains inside were tightly closed, and a faint scent filled the air. A faint, strange odor emanated from the man, Song Xiaoyu's father, Song Hao. In Zhang Ruijuan's eyes, not only Song Xiaoyu but also Song Hao seemed to have become abnormal. Song Hao entered the living room without turning back. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Ruijuan went into his room and used a shoebox by the door to barricade it, preventing it from closing automatically. Song Hao stood in the middle of the living room, his back to Zhang Ruijuan, and pointed to the sofa. Sit down, don't be polite. Zhang Ruijuan didn't intend to sit down. Standing not far from the living room door, he said, Song Xiaoyu is still sleeping. Song Hao walked to the water dispenser, turned on the hot water, and put some tea leaves in a paper cup. He glanced back at Zhang Ruijuan, who was standing there. Why aren't you coming over to sit? Song Hao's expression was now normal, the strange smile from before gone. It won't take long, no need. Zhang Ruijuan made up an excuse. Could you please call Song Xiaoyu out for a moment? Before he finished speaking, he instinctively sensed something amiss behind him and immediately turned around. A person, with her head almost touching his nose. Zhang Ruijuan immediately took 2 steps back, his heart pounding. He looked closely and saw a middle-aged woman in a gray nightgown, her head slightly lowered, hands hanging down, her eyes fixed on him intently. This is my wife, and Lifan, Song Hao said. She just went out to throw out the trash. And Lifan was rather short with fair skin, but to Zhang Ruijuan, her fair skin now appeared sickly pale. Hearing the voice, and Lifan, who had been looking down, raised her face, smiling and looking him straight in the eye. Excuse me, she said. These shoes have soft soles, so I walk quietly. I didn't scare you, did I? Zhang Ruijuan swallowed and shook his head. He had heard noises in the stairwell before entering the house. It must have been him throwing out the trash. The couple's behavior had clearly become unusual. Having been startled earlier, Zhang Ruijuan had retreated into the living room. Song Hao spoke again. Please sit down. I'll pour you some tea and then go wake Xiaoyu. The sofa was nearby, and Zhang Ruijuan sat down against the edge. And Leafin, who had been holding a gold pen, tapped her knuckles lightly. At that moment, and Leafin, standing at the door, casually closed the door and walked towards the bathroom. Aren't you all at work? Zheng Ruijun asked. I was at work, but my daughter hasn't been feeling well these past 2 days, and my old stomach ailment has flared up again, so I'm taking leave to rest at home, Songhua replied. Songhua filled a large glass with hot water and placed it on the coffee table. It was still a little hot. Be careful. Thank you. Zheng Ruijun looked at the steaming glass, having no intention of drinking it. Can you let Song Xiaoyu come out for a moment? He asked. He glanced at the hallway leading to the bedroom. It was also dark and unlit. Songhua didn't say anything more, turned, and walked into the hallway, quickly disappearing into the darkness. The living room was quiet. Zheng Ruijun sat on the edge of the sofa, tapping his index finger lightly with his pen. A faint sound of running water came from the bathroom. It hadn't stopped since Leafin went in. At first, he thought she was washing her hands, but after a moment, the sound continued, as if it would never stop. Just then Zheng Ruijun's phone vibrated. He took it out and pressed the answer button. He recognized the voice on the other end as mine. Hello, Lao Zheng. This is Shun Xi. Are you still at the Song families? Zheng Ruijun paused, then replied, What's up? Nothing. He hung up. Zheng Ruijun stared at his phone in surprise, and realized that a long time had passed. Songhua had gone in to call for help several minutes ago, but there was still no response. And the trash he was taking out required washing his hands for so long. He suppressed his doubts about me, stood up, and slowly walked to the hallway. He opened the door to the bathroom, and saw that the light was off. Zheng Ruijun pressed the wall switch, but there was no response. It seemed broken. He thought for a moment. Pressing the cap of his gold pen, a bright little light immediately illuminated. He used the light to reach the bathroom door and shone it inside. Standing before the sink was Leafin, dressed in gray pajamas. The faucet was running, the water flow was slow, and the mirror was closed, obscuring her face. But in the darkness, she stood motionless with the faucet running. Extremely unusual. Zheng Ruijun didn't make a sound to disturb this strange woman. Instead, he reached for the door, preparing to close it. Based on his experience handling special cases, and knowing the unusual situation in the room indicated there was more than one target, separating them and defeating them one by one was the best strategy. Just as he was about to close the door, the woman under the tree, her back to him, suddenly moved. He looked closely, but she seemed not to have moved. Just as he was puzzled, his gaze suddenly sharpened. He saw that the hair on the back of Leafin's head suddenly arched slightly, as if some force was pushing that hair away. At that moment, he heard the sound of a door closing from the depths of the dark corridor behind. Zheng Ruijun immediately retreated, quickly closed the bathroom door, turned around, and shone the beam of light on the source of the sound. In the light, the 2 doors at the end of the corridor were tightly closed. There was nothing in front of the doors. No one had come out, or someone had already come out, but was not standing at the door. The living room light suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. Zheng Ruijun reacted extremely quickly, immediately pressing the pen cap to turn off the pen and flashlight. He moved quickly towards the living room, close to the corridor wall. There was a strangely behaving Leafin in the bathroom. He had to be careful not to let him out. He was not familiar with the bedroom layout, and could not go there rashly. As soon as he entered the living room, he heard 2 slight noises coming from where he had been standing, like the sound of sharp objects scraping against the wall. If he rashly opened the curtains at this moment, letting in light, he would be easily targeted and attacked by something inside the room. He tiptoed silently to the side of the sofa, his back against the wall, guarding against a sneak attack. The sound of footsteps approached rapidly from the corridor, not on the ground, but climbing the walls like a spider. At the same moment, the bathroom door opened, and Leafin slowly emerged, dragging her heavy feet. In the darkness, Zheng Ruijun pressed himself against the wall, quickly removing the cap from his gold fountain pen, and pressing the small hole at the tip of the nib against his forearm. A slight electric current surged through him, a tingling and numb sensation spreading throughout his body. He was instantly enveloped by a strange electrostatic field. On the right wall, a disheveled, emaciated black shadow crawled towards him, its neck shaking violently with incredible amplitude. But shielded by the electrostatic field, the shadow abruptly stopped as it approached, its head twisting in confusion. The target he had locked onto in the darkness had vanished, and Leafin also slowly approached, dragging his feet. At extremely close range, Zheng Ruijun could see its face clearly. It had no eyeballs. Its slightly open mouth was a black hole with no teeth. The face was wooden and stiff, like a mask. It almost touched Zheng Ruijun's nose, but remained completely unaware. Zheng Ruijun's eyes widened, and he held his breath. The shadow on the wall was clearly Song Xiaoyu, who had been hiding all along. After discovering that his target had disappeared, he retreated little by little, eventually, hidden in the corner beneath the curtains, in the dim light. Zheng Ruijun noticed Leafin's neck. Just as he had described, the skin was stiff and congealed, like a tightly twisted rag. Strangely, his face hadn't turned backward, it remained staring straight ahead. Had he turned 3 times, still staring straight ahead? Had he turned 360 degrees, and then turned back? Zheng Ruijun felt a chill, and Leafin seemed unwilling to leave, his head constantly moving closer. Without a sound, Zheng Ruijun turned his pen, pressed down, and a 2-centimeter-long spike emerged from the hollow of the pen. The probe revealed that this was a weapon used by the Special Investigations Unit to deal with anomalies, containing a super-strong anesthetic agent powerful enough to incapacitate an elephant. And Leafin's head tilted back, and Zheng Ruijun was about to stab the spike into his arm. A loud knocking sound rang out at the door, and Leafin immediately stepped back and looked towards the door. 3 more knocks followed. Song Xiaoyu on the wall instantly crawled out from behind the curtains and quickly scrambled towards the bedroom hallway, disappearing without a trace. Suddenly, the living room lights came back on. The next second, Song Hao, who had been missing, slowly walked out of the hallway and sat stiffly on the sofa, saying nothing. Then, a chilling scene unfolded. Leafin's neck made a cracking sound as his bones rubbed together. His stiff face was abruptly turned backward, hidden by his long hair. At the same time, the folds on his neck, like a rag, quickly disappeared. Another normal face turned from the back of his head. Who is it? Leafin's face suddenly spoke, his lips slightly parted, as he walked towards the living room door. Using the interference of the static field, Zheng Ruijun avoided Song Hao's gaze on the sofa, tiptoed, and silently retreated into the bathroom, slowly closing the door. At the same moment, the front door opened. Hello, is this Song Xiaoyu's house? I stood outside the door, forcing a smile, and trying to appear friendly. Yes, are you Leafin? I smiled, looking completely normal. The eeriness from before had vanished. My name is Shin Xian. I met Song Xiaoyu at Qiguang Orphanage. I need to talk to him. I asked, is he home now? Yes, but he's still asleep. Come in. We should wake him up. Leafin took a step back to let me in, But I didn't go in immediately. Instead, I stood at the door and observed him for a while before suddenly asking, "Have you had any discomfort these past few days, like an itchy head?" Since coming into contact with Song Xiaoyu, my scalp has been itchy and a strange strand of long hair has grown. I'm certain this is no coincidence. Anyone who has been in close contact with him is likely to be infected. This morning, I checked with the other people at the orphanage, and they seem normal for now. If Song Xiaoyu's parents live with him, the probability of them being infected by this unusual hair is extremely high. This is why I went straight to the Song family home after dawn. Most importantly, my understanding of Song Xiaoyu's characteristics has reached 75%. Following the prompts, I can break through to 80 and temporarily lock onto this abnormal being without the wooden carving to contain it. To maintain secrecy, I must come directly to find clues. If I delay any longer, and he loses his mind and becomes a mindless puppet, then everything will be over. As for whether I can become a mindless puppet, that's it. As for whether I can reach level 90 and unlock the skills before that, it's nothing compared to my life. Before coming here, I called Zheng Ruijuan from the special investigation team to confirm. He's still staking out the Song family. If things really get heated, I'll have someone to help. But for safety's sake, besides my own strong finger strength and mental immunity, I still have a sharp kitchen knife hidden in my clothes. There was another crashing sound coming from the direction of the bathroom. I don't know what happened inside, but something was obviously knocked over. Song Xiaoyu's body trembled, and he stood up abruptly, staring in the direction of the bathroom with a look of horror. What happened? Who's in there? Your parents just went in. I looked at Song Xiaoyu in surprise. He didn't seem to be faking it. He was genuinely scared, scratching himself incessantly. What was that behind your head that was saying? I asked, feeling an itch on the back of his head. Just then, Song Xiaoyu's hair twitched again. He shook his head. Nothing, don't scare me. His expression turned terrified, and he instinctively looked around. Just then, a familiar hee-hee sounded, coming from his mouth. Song Xiaoyu was still looking around, his face contorted with fear, yet the eerie laughter emanating from him was a stark contrast that sent chills down my spine. Song Xiaoyu was genuinely frightened, his body trembling. He seemed completely oblivious to the eerie laughter. He took 2 steps closer to me, as if pleading for help. I immediately stepped back, keeping my distance. I reached out to stop him, reminding him, "Now, I'll touch the back of your head." It seemed I had touched another hidden aspect of him. If I could grasp and lock onto the strange phenomenon before me, it would be easy. Upon hearing this, Song Xiaoyu reached out in terror, trembling, to touch the back of his head. The moment he touched it, a scream escaped his lips. He was so frightened that he instinctively moved closer to me. I immediately backed away until my back was against the living room door, pointing at him and shouting, "Stop, don't move." Song Xiaoyu trembled, tears welling in his eyes, and dared not move again. A sharp itch also came from the back of my head. I clutched my head and scratched it vigorously a few times, knowing that it must be the other person causing the trouble. I asked, "What did you just touch?" Song Xiaoyu was about to answer when suddenly his body convulsed, an expression of extreme pain appearing on his face. His torso seemed to be affected by a strange force. Stretching and standing ramrod straight, he made a cracking sound, as if something was stuck in his throat. His features contorted, and his limbs tensed rapidly, as if his body no longer belonged to him. Seconds later, a scene that left me speechless unfolded. Song Xiaoyu's contorted face twisted rapidly to the side with a cracking sound. My first thought was that his neck was broken. Upon closer inspection, his neck was indeed twisted to an unbelievable angle, his skin like a wrung-out rag. Song Xiaoyu's consciousness had clearly vanished completely, and he turned to his back without resistance. What surprised me even more was that as his face turned, another eerie face appeared from behind. The back of my head turned to the front, and the face had the exact same features as his, yet it maintained a strange smile, stiff and wooden. The familiar laughter rang out again. I suddenly realized that the eerie sound came from here. Because it resonated from the same head, it easily made people mistakenly believe that the back of their head had an identical face. Just thinking about it sent chills down my spine. At this moment, this face had taken control of my body. Turning his head, Song Xiaoyu's skin was deathly pale, his body taut. That eerie smiling face was faintly visible through the gaps in his long hair. He strode towards me. I silently speculated that after the back of the head itched, not only would long hair grow, but it would also mutate and grow another face. This face usually hid under the hair of the possessed person. If it were like mine, his short hair wasn't enough to conceal it. Perhaps when he matured, it would directly cover the original owner's face. The thought sent a chill down my spine. The next second, Song Xiaoyu was already close, his arm grabbing my neck. I could feel his terrifying strength. Instinctively, I gripped the hoe at my waist, my right fist clenching, ready to smash that stiff face. But now it seemed unnecessary. The familiar silver text popped into my mind. Face skin current characteristics, understanding level 95. Face skin characteristics, understanding level reached 80+. Face skin locking. Proceed now. It turned out the unknown anomaly was called face skin locking. Without hesitation, I responded in my mind. Suddenly, Song Xiaoyu, who was grabbing me, released a burst of strength, his legs buckling. He fell to the ground, his long, parted hair covering the back of his head returning to its original state. His face was now locked. Its characteristics would be lost within 10 days. Seeing the last line of the message, I was stunned. I hadn't expected the lock to only last 10 days. Even if I wanted to absorb it after that, I would lose it. The only solution was to create a new face target within those 10 days to absorb its characteristics. But where was the locked face now? I frowned, suddenly realizing that whenever I thought of that face, it would immediately appear in my mind, disappearing instantly if I shifted my attention. This thing had somehow entered my mind. A strange feeling welled up inside me, making me uneasy. I glanced down at Song Xiaoyu on the ground. His chest was rising and falling slightly, his breathing even, and his twisted neck had strangely returned to normal. He hadn't died on the spot. The crooked neck had strangely returned to normal, and he hadn't died on the spot. Luckily, I bent down and gently parted the hair at the back of his head. I found that the scalp underneath was gone, not torn open, but the skin on the back of his head was severely necrotic. emitting an abnormal aura. No wonder he looked so ugly. This scene made me feel nauseous. However, judging from his appearance, Song Xiaoyu's skull was still intact. I quickly took him to the hospital for treatment. He should be out of danger. I suddenly froze and quickly reached out to touch the back of my own head. Since I had locked onto the thick-skinned person, the itching sensation from before had disappeared. I didn't know if I was still okay. As soon as I touched the back of my head, something fell down. Looking at the ground, I saw a small piece of dried scalp with a few strands of hair attached. These strands of hair were withered and bent, like withered grass in winter. At the same time, in the bathroom, Zheng Ruijuan was tightly held by Song Hao, unable to break free. And Li Fin pounced on him and stretched out her hands, directly trapping Zheng. A putrid stench wafted from Ruijuan's neck, making him nauseous. The back of Zheng Ruijuan's head began to itch, but in the face of this deadly crisis, he completely ignored the itch. With a flick of his right arm, a black telescopic baton slid into his hand. Holding the baton, and Li Fin, who was choking him, suddenly released her grip and collapsed, losing consciousness. Song Hao, who was holding him, also shuddered and fell to the ground, unresponsive. Panting heavily, Zheng Ruijuan was somewhat bewildered. He put away the baton, straightened up by the sink, and looked down. Zheng Ruijuan turned on the bathroom light. In the light, he saw that in Li Fin's head seemed to have some hair falling out. He squatted down and gently pulled, tearing off a piece of dry, withered skin, like a dehydrated face mask. A large amount of long black hair was stuck to the mask, and the skin covering it was already necrotic. A strong, unpleasant odor emanated from the mask. Zheng Ruijuan carefully observed that both men were still breathing, though unconscious. Song Hao's face also looked strange and dry. Pale, thin skin was resting above his nose. To be on the safe side, he put on his black rubber gloves before picking up the skin and examining it closely. It looked exactly like the skin shed by a large snake. Song Hao's own face, constantly covered by the fake mask, was flushed red, as if he had an alcohol allergy. After a few seconds, Zheng Ruijuan suddenly realized there was no movement outside the living room. He immediately put down the mask, turned around, and rushed into the living room. Inside, I was also standing there, holding a withered mask, deep in thought. Don't touch it directly with your hands, Zheng Ruijuan said as he came out. He immediately reminded me that the detached mask was very strange. He immediately dialed Li Nijin's number, requesting more people to handle the scene and calling an ambulance. Putting the mask down, why worry? This thing just came off my head. I put aside my pride and wasn't too worried. After seeing that it was Zheng Ruijuan, I was stunned. You've been in the bathroom the whole time. I've been in the bathroom the whole time. Zheng Ruijuan nodded, clearly not wanting to continue the topic, and asked, are you alright? I shook my head and noticed that he was very careful handling these things, always wearing black rubber gloves. Why did you come here? Are you really delivering shampoo? Zheng Ruijuan glanced at the shampoo that had fallen on the floor. I didn't answer, grabbed a tissue from the table, touched the back of his head, and pressed down a nearly transparent piece of scalp with a few strands of new hair stuck to it. That's why I'm here. I waved it in front of him and pointed to the dry scalp on the floor. Zheng Ruijuan looked at me a few more times. You little rascal, aren't you afraid of something going wrong coming here? Didn't you think you'd be here too? I made up a story. The result was almost a miscalculation. Zheng Ruijuan stared at me for a moment, then took the transparent skin. It's good that you're alright now. Besides these things, did you notice anything else unusual? I thought carefully. No. This woman wanted to attack me, but suddenly she fell to the ground. And then you see this. You didn't do anything. Zheng Ruijuan continued to ask. No. Zheng Ruijuan frowned slightly. He squatted down and carefully examined the festering wound on the back of Song Xiaoyu's head. The wound didn't change his expression at all. I also moved closer. Old Zheng, have you encountered similar cases of scalp ghosts before? It's always good to take this opportunity to learn more information. Maybe this is related to Yi Ting's disappearance. Zheng Ruijuan repeated without looking up, scalp ghost. He then chuckled. This thing isn't a ghost. It is not a ghost. My expression froze. If it's not a ghost, then what left this withered skin? Knowing that Zheng Ruijuan had stood up and looked at me, I realized that I had experienced more anomalies than you. From what I could see now, some special cases might indeed involve what we understand as ghosts, but in others, well, I didn't know what I was dealing with. Like this case now. The fact that he could tell me all this was clearly because I also possessed a certain kind of unusual attraction. Otherwise, I would have collapsed unconscious like Song Xiaoyu. Wasn't this possession? I was even more puzzled. This ghost, by disguising itself as the possessed person's face, secretly hid and could directly control the person at crucial moments. Moreover, it used some method we didn't yet know to transfer its possession clone to me and you. Zheng Ruijuan paused, looking at me a few more times. You're quite something, kid. I've only said a few words and you've deduced so much. He habitually wanted to pat my shoulder, but hesitated, his hand. The fur coat, which had just touched the diseased window, retracted midair. But speculation aside, since you say he's a ghost, have you seen his true form? He picked up the fur coat that had fallen from my head. Have you ever seen a ghost with a dry, solid scalp? You and I can both touch it, and it can undergo chemical changes, like drying out due to lack of moisture. I almost blurted out, but I held it back, thinking to myself, this thing's image is right here in my mind. How would you explain this? If I stated that I had already denied the existence of the face, his reasoning might be overturned, but I was even more confused. If it wasn't a ghost, how could I have incorporated it into a wood carving? But if it was a ghost, this withered face would indeed have dried up due to dehydration, perfectly conforming to the natural laws of this world. I pondered this silently, but couldn't find an answer. Zheng Ruijuan continued. The ghosts I encountered had human forms and were elusive and illusory. They are not like this. They cannot be defined by our understanding as real or not. They are not like this. At this moment, I directly grabbed the face in my hand, and he raised it, almost slapping me across the face. These words made the image of blood pupils involuntarily surface in my mind. They also had substance and could crawl through nerve pulsations. Fine, even bloodlines aren't ghosts, but those are organs in Lin Wanru's eyes. If there's no resentment driving him, how could he lose his mind? As for Jiao Hongbing, his human form and elusive nature fit the description of a ghost. Based on his explanation, a little speculation makes me feel that this world is becoming increasingly perplexing. Just then, Zheng Ruijuan looked around at the ground with some surprise and said, Song Xiaoyu's back of the head should also have a face. Did you see it just now? I immediately shook my head, showing a surprised expression. Zheng Ruijuan immediately said, "You should leave first. Li Nijing and Zhao Wenbo will be here soon. If the face belonging to Song Xiaoyu is still here, this room is still very dangerous. I can't wait to leave now." Without saying another word, I opened the door and ran out. I closed the living room door from the inside and stood in the hallway, calling out through the door, "Old Zheng, I'm leaving now. Call me if you need anything, or come find me at the Evergreen community." A response came from inside. I turned and quickly left. As my footsteps faded into the distance, Zheng Ruijuan's expression slowly changed from tense to cold. His body trembled slightly, a layer of grayness spreading across his face. A faint crackling sound echoed around him. Then, he extended his left index finger, gloved with rubber, and plunged it straight into the terrifying window at the back of Song Xiaoyu's head. Just as I stepped out of the courtyard gate, a black SUV pulled up. Sitting in the passenger seat was Li Nijing. The security guard at the gate approached and asked Li Nijing, "The Public Security Bureau is here to investigate the family living here." "Which family are you?" the guard asked. "Building 1. In Unit 82, Li Nijing replied that 3 years ago, her dog, Wang Kai, bit her neighbor, insisting that the neighbor had bitten her. The neighbor, not trusting her, bit her, resulting in a fungal infection and Wang Kai died. The family then fled that very night with Wang Kai." The security guard overheard this, rolling his eyes. An SUV drove straight into the community. I, standing at the other end, was also stunned by what I heard. When I came to my senses, an ambulance also roared into the community. I didn't linger and took a taxi back to Chongqing Tong community. This plan went smoothly. The itchy scalp that had been bothering me disappeared, and I even gained a strange face. Sitting in the car, I carefully examined the face in my mind. I initially thought it was Song Xiaoyu's appearance, but upon closer inspection, I realized the features seemed unfamiliar to me. Yet after a while, a strange sense of familiarity crept in, somewhere between strange and familiar, making me want to look again. It was noon when I got home. As usual, I checked the door and sat down at my desk, eagerly opening my phone. There were 3 encrypted documents saved, one by Jia Hongbing, one by Shui Tong, and the last one, which I had just added, by Song Xiaoyu. I decided to open the 3rd document, renaming it Face Skin, and began adding the latest feature. Name, Face Skin ID, 03 feature description. This anomaly, in the early stages of possession, causes the possessed person to experience itchy scalp symptoms, similar to scalp inflammation, leading people to mistake it for a skin disease. Moreover, if possession is successful or a new phase begins, it will generate a face exactly like the possessed person, attaching itself to the person and intermittently controlling their behavior. During this time, the possessed person's neck will twist and rotate, and there is a certain chance that it will infect nearby humans. After adding the characteristics, I stared at the text, lost in thought for a moment. Then, between the name and number, I added a new line. Name, face type, monster number, 03. Zheng Ruijuan is more experienced than me. His analysis makes a lot of sense. Since I can't determine the essence of the face, I simply define it as a monster for now. Having completed my speculation about the face, the silver text in my mind shows a 95% understanding level of its characteristics. Judging from the face's appearance, it definitely has a prior skill. The higher the understanding level, the more likely one is to absorb and acquire that prior skill. The higher the probability, the better. I decided to try pushing my understanding to 100%. After thinking for a moment, I added a sentence to the description of the face skin's characteristics. This face skin is not a ghost. There was no reaction in my mind. Based on Zheng Ruijuan's hint, I revised it again. This face skin is actually not a ghost, but an unknown anomaly. Still, there was no response. It seems that qualitative guesses about the nature of the anomaly cannot improve the understanding. I simply re-reasoned about the characteristics of the face skin. During this period, the possessed person's neck will twist and rotate, and there is a certain probability that it will infect nearby humans until it eventually controls the number of humans through infection to its limit. They will lurk among ordinary people, and gradually, it will behave like an ordinary person. Just as I finished editing this, the silver font finally changed. Face skin's current characteristic understanding level, 99. Looking at this number, I was speechless. For the next whole hour, no matter how I reasoned, I couldn't overcome this final hurdle. It seems that due to some unknown reason, I cannot fully grasp its characteristics at present. Then, I turned my attention to the characteristic strength. Currently, I have encountered 3 anomalies, Jia Hongbing, Blood Eye, and Face Skin. The most powerful is Blood Eye's physical attack, which is bizarre and can paralyze, seize eye sockets, control the body, and continuously weaken my mental antibodies. Next is Face Skin. Its physical attack is not strong, but its mental influence is even greater than Blood Eye's. The weakest is Jia Hongbing. Almost no mental influence one-on-one. They are no match for me. Based on this gradient, I assign grades to their characteristic strength using letters. Jia Hongbing is grade F, his thick skin is grade B, and Blood Eye is grade D. Until a higher level anomaly is available as a reference, I'll tentatively assign them these grades. After all revisions were completed, I carefully reread the textual descriptions of Jia Hongbing and Blood Eye. Name, Jia Hongbing. Type, ghost number, 01. Characteristic description. This anomaly can replicate itself to become exactly like a human in the current world and continue living. Currently, it is Jia Hongbing. He himself is mostly silent, rarely speaks, and rarely expresses his will to the outside world, but can indirectly control the real Hongbing. Characteristic strength, grade F. Name, bloodline type, monster number, 02. Characteristic description. This is a bloodline that can move on its own and seems to have its own thoughts. The bloodline, originally Lin Wanru's eyes, transformed into a bloodline after her death, and can separate from the body to exist independently, propelled by the optic nerve. Currently, it seems to achieve parasitism by seizing the eye sockets of humans or animals. Its characteristic strength is D level. Regarding the definition of blood pupil, I'm unsure. Although it originates from Lin Wanru's eyes, its manifestation is more like a monster. If I couldn't contain it, it would have become the 3rd parasite long ago. For now, I'll treat it as a monster. Turning off my phone screen, I rubbed my aching neck. My facial skin is currently at its most sensitive, but I haven't yet crafted a wooden carving to absorb its characteristics. Danger is ever present. I can't just wait. I must quickly improve my survival abilities. I decided to first deduce and absorb the bloodline's characteristics to increase my physical strength. If I could acquire the previous skills, even better. If I could further enhance the strange power in my hands, it would be even better in future encounters. Being able to instantly cripple a powerful enemy is definitely more important than anything else. Facing an unknown future with powerful physical attacks, crafting a wooden carving is time-consuming and labor-intensive. Rushing it on-site is impossible. The prerequisite for relying on understanding its characteristics to lock onto and resolve the anomaly is that I must have sufficient self-protection and combat capability. I picked up the blood-eye wooden carving from the workbench, stared at it, and forced myself to think quietly. Currently, my understanding of the blood-eye's characteristics is 70%, which can be summarized into 3 points. First, it's a mutation that occurred after Lin Wanru's death. Second, it can separate from the original owner's body and exist independently. And third, it can seize the eye socket and parasitize and control. These are all deductions derived from previous contact with the mutated Lin Wanru, the fight with the mangy dog, and finally, close-range combat. As for any hidden characteristics, I have no clue, but the characteristic of shamelessness. A new insight struck me. After staring at the target for over 10 minutes, I began to mutter to myself. The Blood Eye's true form doesn't belong to Lin Wanru, it's an external entity. My understanding of the Blood Eye's current characteristics reached 85%. My eyes brightened slightly, and I continued to speculate calmly. It wasn't formed from Lin Wanru's resentment after her death, but rather it was hidden within Lin Wanru's body or around her eyes, waiting for her unexpected death to immediately seize her body. The Blood Eye's purpose was to continuously search for a better body. My understanding of the Blood Eye's current characteristics reached 95. Such a high level of understanding meant I could directly activate absorption. I suppressed my excitement and silently recited in my mind, absorb the Blood Eye's characteristics. Immediately, a line of silver-white text popped up in my mind. Blood Eye's current characteristics, understanding level 95. Can absorb its characteristics? Now begin. Prompt. If understanding of its characteristics reaches 90, during the absorption process, there is a high chance of discovering and absorbing the Blood Eye's previous skill. Prompt 2. Blood Eye possesses the previous skill. I immediately repeated it. Blood Eye indeed possesses the previous skill. The next second, the Blood Eye wooden carving in front of me trembled slightly. A snap sounded in my mind. At the same time, I did not notice that the Jiahongbing wooden carving not far away also trembled slightly. My attention was entirely on my hands. I saw that the skin under my index finger was slightly red, like a red-hot iron. The body strength progress bar under my eyes suddenly rose to 88, a full 36 percentage points higher than the previous 52. Blood Eye has strong characteristics. This improvement was completely within my expectations. Immediately afterwards, the text popped up in my mind again. Obtain the previous skill heterochromia. Method, active skill. Effect, give you a different world. Consumes mental energy. Consumption varies depending on the degree of use. Side effect, the right eye may experience temporary blindness. It can be recovered within 6 hours. Carefully understand these prompts. Heterochromia is an active skill that I can activate by myself. After activation, it should be able to pass through this fused right eye. Seeing different visual scenes requires specific mental energy consumption, which can only be known through use. The side effect is temporary blindness in the right eye for up to 6 hours. I looked down at my hands, and from my index finger to my elbow, I felt an overwhelming sense of power, yet my appearance remained normal. To test the depth of my strength, I took out the ironwood that had been pinched with my fingers and squeezed it hard with one hand. With a crack, the hard ironwood didn't dent but shattered into 9 irregular pieces. After absorbing the abnormal properties, my body was undergoing a qualitative change. Not only did I gain antibodies against mental attacks, but my physical strength also surged. Absorbing the properties of Armored Red Soldier and Blood Eye finally gave me the confidence to directly confront abnormalities. But soon, I sensed something was wrong in the room. Everything seemed normal at the workbench and bedside, but this strange feeling grew stronger. I stood up and glanced sharply at the bedroom door. My whole body trembled, as if frozen in place. Even my breath stopped. Behind the bedroom door I was impersonating, there was an adult squatting. He was squatting there with his back to the door, completely natural, without any intention of hiding himself. Who was this person? My heart pounded as I waited to enter the room. I hadn't heard a sound beforehand. Who would have thought someone would be crouching behind the door? After a brief moment of shock, I suppressed my panic and clenched my fists. With my current strength, I could easily kill a bull with one punch. I stared intently at him, slowly approaching on tiptoe. The person remained motionless. His exposed clothing only intensified the terror in my eyes. Dark jeans, a light blue short-sleeved shirt, and slippers. I froze, glancing down at my own light blue short-sleeved shirt. Dark jeans, identical slippers. Even the socks were exactly the same. I stared incredulously at the silent man. This couldn't possibly be a coincidence. My Adam's apple bobbed slightly. I could see him. The other person didn't react at all. The situation was too unbelievable. I felt a brief moment of oxygen deprivation. I shouted again, but he still didn't move. I simply strode over and flung open the bedroom door, completely exposed to my gaze. This man, with his arms crossed and dressed exactly like me. Even without looking up, I was certain this guy was very likely me. I took a step back warily, staring intently at him. Can you hear me? I demanded sharply. After a few seconds, the man slowly raised his head, his gaze unfocused. I stared intently at his face. Indeed, he looked exactly like me. He released his arms, slowly stood up, his expression cold and stiff, as if he couldn't see me, and walked straight to the living room. I watched him silently, as if looking in a mirror, until he disappeared through the doorway. The living room quickly fell silent. I went to the bedroom door, watching him disappear through the doorway. The living room quickly fell silent. I went to the bedroom door and looked out. Another man sat on the sofa, his eyes vacant, like a mindless idiot. Looking at his profile, I had a guess. Had he absorbed the Blood Eye wood carving stone and activated Gia's? The Red Soldier's characteristics in this experience were exactly the same as the original Red Soldier. I thought that actively absorbing would not cause this to happen, but it seems that something unexpected has happened. However, apart from being an idiot, this copy does not seem to be in any danger. Most importantly, I am not mentally disoriented like the Red Soldier. The Red Soldier was passively copied, while I actively absorbed and experienced side effects. Therefore, my original self was not affected. On the contrary, the copy seemed very dull. However, to be honest, my profile is still quite handsome, like a fine old wine that gets better with age. Shamelessly admiring myself for a moment, I turned around and went back to my room. Jiahongbing and the Black Shadow and the Blood-Eyed Wood carving were completely free of their characteristics. I went back to the living room and glanced at the copy on the sofa. His lips were slightly open, as if he was about to drool. Just then, A knock on the door suddenly rang out. Shen Xian opened the door. It was Li Nijing. There was a figure moving outside the window, obviously peeking in. Although the window paper was pasted on and I couldn't see it, I couldn't let him see this copy at this moment. I didn't dare to make a sound and rushed into the bedroom. I put my phone on silent. The screen lit up immediately. It was Li Nijing calling. I didn't answer and quietly went back to the living room. I grabbed the dull copy on the sofa and pulled it up. As he pushed into the bedroom, his drool fell to the floor and I shoved it into the room. His phone rang for almost a minute before hanging up. Li Nijing's voice came from outside the door. Was she home? He hadn't answered the phone. The young sheriff, Zhao Wenba, picked up his gun. Perhaps something had happened, or perhaps she had gone out. Should we wait a while? There was silence outside the door for a moment. Suddenly, the living room door lock made a metallic scraping sound. Someone inserted a tool. I was immediately startled. I heard Zhao Wenba say, "Sister Jing, should we go in directly?" The sound from the lock stopped. Li Nijing replied, "That guy came back from Song Xiayu's house. He doesn't answer knocks or phone calls. What if he's been possessed by that missing scalp again? We have to go in and check. Besides, our special case investigation team has the right to enter any private area without the owner's permission." This woman forced her way in out of concern, but I had no doubt about her ability to sneak in and pick locks. I quickly turned around to prepare to take out the other Tang Yanshi, but my gaze swept around the bedroom. It was empty. The guy who had just been pushed in had vanished into thin air. Before I could think further, the door lock behind me made a crisp click, and I heard Li Nijing enter. The door was locked from the inside, but I opened it, which meant he must have guessed someone was in the room. My heart jumped into my throat. I suddenly threw myself onto the bed, closed my eyes, and pretended to be asleep. Then casually slipped my phone under my pillow. The next second, the door was pushed open, and two people entered the room one after the other. One heavy footstep went straight to the bedroom, while the other, lighter footsteps lingered in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. I strained my ears, knowing that the one searching outside must be Li Nijing. Standing by the bed was Zhao Wenba. I was most afraid that the clone hadn't disappeared and he would see me, so I held my breath and pretended to be asleep. Neither of them spoke, and I couldn't wake up immediately. A moment later, Li Nijing's footsteps arrived as well. As I entered the bedroom, the foot of the bed suddenly sank, and I heard Zhao Wenba whisper to Li Nijing, "Do you know what happened? There's a slipper on the bed." Hearing this, I almost couldn't hold back my laughter. I had jumped onto the bed in such a rush that one of my slippers got caught on the sheets. Since the other party had spoken, I had a good reason to wake up. I slowly turned over, groggily opened my eyes, and then sat up with a start, staring at the two people by the bed, pretending to be shaken. "Commander Li, Commander Zhao, how did you get in?" Zhao Wenba didn't answer, but looked at Li Nijing. Li Nijing looked at me seriously. Seeing that I looked normal, she explained, "I thought something had happened to you at home again, so I was worried and came in to check on you." Seeing that he hadn't found anything amiss in the other rooms, my heart settled down. It seemed my other self had simply vanished without being hidden. I feigned surprise. "You can just call me," Li Nijing said, waving her phone. "I called you, but you didn't answer, so I had to resort to this." I pretended to pull my phone out from under my pillow, then exclaimed, "I put it on silent mode before I went to sleep." Then, I asked in surprise, "Commander Li, let's be honest, did you take the key to this place from Commander Shenwei?" Li Nijing paused, turning to look at Zhao Wenba beside him. The latter was embarrassed again. Li Nijing laughed and replied, "I have the universal wisdom tooth, a standard feature of the investigation team. Wenba has it too, right?" Zhao Wenba stammered, "No." Li Nijing winked at him. Watching the two of them acting like they were performing a skit, I suppressed a laugh and asked, "What brings you here?" "It's about Song Xiayu's family," Li Nijing said. "When we got there, Brother Zheng said you were already gone. But after a thorough search, we couldn't find the skin that fell off Song Xiayu's body. We were worried that the thing might have come back with you. So Sister Nijing and I came to check on you immediately." Zhao Wenba added. I nodded. "If I were on the investigation team, I would definitely have come to check too. Do you mind if Wenba checks your body?" Li Nijing looked concerned. "Because Brother Zheng described that thing as being able to attach itself to a person's skin, we must check carefully for your safety. But for safety reasons, breaking down the door is also necessary." Zhao Wenba leaned closer and examined me from head to toe. Zhao Wenba leaned in and thoroughly examined my head and toes, even ruffling my hair into a mess. He meticulously checked my scalp. Since locking onto my face, the back of my head hadn't itched, so he couldn't find anything unusual. A few minutes later, Zhao Wenba looked up at Li Nijing and asked, "Nothing special. Do you feel any discomfort or tightness in your skin?" Li Nijing asked. I shook my head. Since that layer of skin fell off at Song Xiayu's house, there had been nothing unusual. Li Nijing continued, "You should still go to the city's physical examination center tomorrow for a checkup, especially for skin conditions. That's our designated physical examination center. When you get there, give me your name and phone number, have your photo taken, sign, and register. There's no need to pay. As a member of the special case team, I often come into contact with strange things, so it's indeed necessary to be on duty. I naturally wouldn't refuse the free physical examination at the testing center and readily agreed." Entering the living room, I subconsciously glanced at the other me in the corner. Although I had disappeared, no one could guarantee I wouldn't suddenly reappear. Fortunately, Li Nijing and the other person didn't intend to linger. As we reached the door, Li Nijing turned back and reminded me. "Brother Zheng mentioned last time that if you encounter something unusual repeatedly, it's very likely because it has a special attraction for them. So be careful in the future." He then winked at Zhao Wenba, who pulled a black, police-style extendable baton from his bag and handed it to me. "Keep this baton safe. You can use it for self-defense and physical attacks. If the unusual thing is a ghost, you can press the button on the handle and aim at the target. It should be effective against the ghost about 3 times. I took the baton and thanked them, then frowned and asked why I hadn't seen old Zheng at Song Xiayu's house before. Li Nijing laughed and said, "Don't worry about it. He has many methods for handling these cases. and almost every case is handled differently. I paused. Then Li Nijing said, your mental strength is quite good. If you're interested, you can come to the Public Security Bureau to register after passing the physical examination. Maybe you can get a government job in the future. I was stunned, then instantly realized what they meant by physical examination. It was just a registration excuse. These two wanted to recruit me, of course, on the premise that I hadn't been invaded by anything unusual. A rather inappropriate analogy suddenly popped into my mind. This felt like being castrated and forced into the palace. If they weren't trying to recruit me, the investigation team wouldn't have given me a retractable baton for dealing with unusual things for no reason. They probably valued my strong mental resistance when facing the supernatural. For the next few days, I continued working at the shop as usual, taking breaks to try on clothes and undergo a free full-body checkup. I successfully received a certificate. During the checkup, I specifically asked the doctor to examine both arms, but they couldn't find the reason for my increased finger strength. Soon after, the wood I ordered from the supplier arrived. I stocked up on softwoods like pine and camphor, aiming for low profit margins and high sales volume. I also selected some hardwoods to carve high-priced, exquisite pieces. The ebony for my second bloodwood carving had arrived, and for the face, I chose elm, with its rich grain and dynamic design. For the following week, I spent my days at the shop making small anime wood carvings. Serving as a living advertisement, I would lay the wood carvings of the face and blood red Polonia wood out of the workbench at night and meticulously work on them. With the successive use of various wire saws and hot tools, the second blood red eye and face carvings were finally complete. The night the face was finished, I stared at the finished product, momentarily stunned. The surface of the wood carving was a face, with a solid wood base behind. In an instant, the finished product was lifelike, even exuding a kind of eerie beauty like an ancient Egyptian pharaoh's mask. Staring at this face, I suddenly realized that from the moment I started, I had been carving the texture and wrinkles entirely based on the image of that dark shadow in my mind, without ever considering whether this face resembled Songxia. I turned the desk lamp to its brightest setting and placed the face carving under the glaring light to examine it carefully for a moment. After that, I was horrified to find that this face was starting to look more and more like someone's light willow leaf eyebrows. Her eyes were clear and deep, her nose straight and high, her lips slightly upturned, and the shallow dimples at the corners of her mouth seemed to be smiling at me. I was startled and instinctively leaned back. When I looked again, the wooden carving had changed. Yi Ting's image had vanished without a trace, replaced by a charming, quirky, and mischievous expression. It looked exactly like Li Nijing. Holy crap! My gaze went blank the more I looked, the more it resembled Li Nijing. My mind even automatically recalled her words. I have the right to enter any private space. I gasped, instantly realizing that the original face could transform into anyone's likeness. And this wooden carving I had made perfectly replicated the original's characteristics. In other words, 1,000 people looking at it might see 1,000 different faces. If everyone could see this effect, the value of this wooden carving would be immeasurable. A surge of excitement welled up inside me, and I considered whether to make several more to display in a shop and sell at a high price. With my thoughts settled, I made a move. The dark shadow of the face in my mind vanished instantly. The next second, a dark shadow emerged from the wooden carving of the face before me, lurking peacefully within it. Soon after, lines of silver text popped into my mind, fulfilling the conditions for absorbing the face's properties. Absorbing these properties could enhance the host's physical strength. Start absorption now. The prompt reads, if your understanding of its characteristics reaches 90%, there's a chance you'll discover and absorb the face skin's previous skill during absorption. My understanding of the face skin's previous skill is currently at its limit. I pondered this. It seems I've reached my limit in understanding abnormal characteristics. I started absorbing. The feeling was the same as when I absorbed Jia Hongbing and the blood-eyed wooden carving. The face skin wooden carving trembled slightly. A cracking sound came from my mind. My hands felt like red-hot irons under my skin, and my body strength progress bar under my eyes increased to 100. It only increased by 12 percentage points from 88 to 100. I was a little puzzled. At the same moment, another message popped up in my mind. Acquired previous skill, face change method. Active skill effect. Generates another face to replace the host's original face. Low mental energy consumption. Side effect, identity loss. Duration, at least 8 hours. I carefully digested the prompt. Activating face change allows me to change my appearance and replace my original self, similar to ancient disguise techniques. Low mental energy consumption, approximately level 1 energy. When my energy is depleted and I encounter an anomaly with a strong mental attack, I'm afraid I'll have to die on the spot. As for the side effects of losing my identity, since I've changed my face, others in top-notch intelligent facial recognition technology naturally won't recognize me. Once I return to normal, my identity will also be restored. Speculation aside, I always feel that something is being overlooked. In addition, the traditional Chinese character 100 should already be the maximum value, requiring special conditions to break through. After absorbing 2 characteristics in succession, I not only gained heterochromia and a face change, but my physical strength has also increased again. The skin and muscle strength of my forearms and shoulders have also changed significantly. These past few days, I've been busy with carving and opening the shop, and my life is gradually becoming more regular. On the 3rd day after my physical examination, I decided to submit my physical examination card to the Public Security Bureau for registration as requested by Li Nijing. In order to find clues about Yi Ting's disappearance, I will inevitably encounter anomalies again. If I can use this to climb up to the special case investigation team, their resources will definitely be of great help. They want to use my mental power, but I also want to use them in return. This tacit cooperation is beneficial to everyone. Remake after finishing the second face carving. I took it and the blood-eyed wood carving into the shop and officially put them on the shelves. On that very day, I received a call from Li Nijing. I thought it was about the medical examination card, but when I answered, he asked abruptly, "Have you submitted the application to adopt Lin Wanru's daughter, Lin Feifei?" I was stunned for a moment, wondering why he was asking this. I replied, "Yes." Judging from Li Nijing's tone, he seemed to be in a good mood. We've investigated, and among all the people we know, you and Feifei are the closest. I didn't expect you to be so kind-hearted. I smiled and didn't say anything. Actually, the reason I decided to adopt Feifei was because I discovered that she had recently experienced 2 abnormalities, just like me. I don't believe it was purely bad luck. Zhang Ruijuan and Li Nijing said that people who frequently experience abnormalities are mostly related to themselves, such as having special characteristics. I have good news to tell you. The tone of Li Nijing on the other end of the phone was cheerful. I vaguely guessed what Nijing wanted to say. Then I heard him say, in response to your, as an ordinary citizen, submitting a medical examination certificate to the Public Security Bureau demonstrates our goodwill and shows our investigation team's sincerity in cooperating with you in certain areas in the future. We've already spoken to the Civil Affairs Department of the municipal government, and the suppressed adoption application has been approved, right? Li Nijing continued with a smile. You should know that our investigation team has the same authority as the municipal government and the Public Security Bureau. Just from her tone, you can tell she's a crazy girl who's been blinded by power. Now the Civil Affairs Department is giving it the green light, and you can take Feifei back as early as tomorrow. After praising her achievements, Li Nijing happily hung up the phone. Around noon, at the gate of the orphanage, I was carrying 2 large cloth bags and a canvas backpack full of Feifei's clothes and daily necessities. Standing next to me was a little adult carrying a Pikachu backpack. Today, Feifei was wearing a purple cartoon short-sleeve shirt and a skirt, with several braids, looking very cute. Where are we going? Feifei looked at me. I showed her. As I smiled and headed home, an empty taxi pulled up. I waved it down and turned to Feifei, asking if she had finished packing up everything in the shop and taken everything out. I left the rest of the toys and snacks for her friends. Feifei nodded obediently and put the luggage in the trunk. The two of us got into the back seat and drove towards the Evergreen Ivy League neighborhood. Although Feifei tried to remain silent, she was clearly unable to contain her excitement, staring intently at the street scenes outside the car window. Her time in the orphanage had obviously made her feel stifled. Looking at her rosy cheeks, I thought of the more than 100,000 yuan in savings Lin Wanru had left her in the apartment on the 3rd floor of the Evergreen Ivy League neighborhood. To be honest, Feifei is richer than me now, but the savings are managed in a special account by the Civil Affairs Bureau. I didn't adopt her for the money. Looking at her restrained demeanor, what I really cared about was Wai Song Xiaoyu, who was controlled by shamelessness back after her transformation. Why did she have to go back to the orphanage to find her? Could it be that Feifei, like me, is also attracted to abnormalities? Otherwise, what other unknown reason could there be? The taxi stopped at the entrance of the residential area. I paid the fare. Feifei, with her little backpack on her back, stood on the sidewalk, looking around. Every scene in her eyes filled her with uncontrollable joy. After I got my luggage, Feifei skillfully turned into the stairwell leading to her own home. I followed behind. On the 1st floor, Grandpa Wang was cleaning in front of his house. Grandpa Fuguwei, hello. Feifei's sweet voice rang out as she greeted him. Then she went upstairs. Grandpa Wang was suddenly startled. He looked up and saw me carrying large and small bags, following behind Feifei. He turned back and smiled at her, wondering, is that Feifei? Lin Feifei turned her head and smiled. It's my grandpa. Grandpa, Feifei's back. Wang Fuguwei stood up with a big smile, holding an empty basin. Feifei pointed at me. Uncle Shun took me from the orphanage. He adopted me. Wang Fuguwei immediately dropped the basin, staring at Feifei and me in disbelief until the two went upstairs. I didn't see that. I smiled bitterly to myself the whole way, saying nothing. When we reached the 3rd floor, Feifei stopped and looked at the tightly closed door of her house. Since the incident, the door had never been opened except when the security guards locked it. The door lock still had a yellow seal on it. Staring at the front door, Feifei's eyes slowly welled up with tears. He stood there motionless. I took his hand and whispered, don't look anymore. Let us go upstairs first. Feifei didn't say anything, looked away, and came up to the 4th floor with me. After entering my room, Feifei looked left and right, realizing he could see the layout at a glance. He put his little backpack on the sofa. Seeing me take the package into the bedroom, he prepared to follow me in. I closed the living room door first. I spoke from inside the bedroom. Feifei paused for a moment, then saw me peek into the bedroom doorway, reminding him, remember to close the door before you come in next time. Feifei nodded. Turning back to close the living room door, he curiously entered the bedroom. The workbench in the bedroom immediately caught his eye, followed by the wooden shelves displaying the fake red soldier sculptures with bloodshot eyes and faces. Feifei looked up curiously at these sculptures. On the shelves were several pieces Yi Ting had liked in the past, and a few more that he had recently made. He took out a recently completed ebony Buddha statue from the workbench drawer. He remembered that it was around the time Feifei's mother, Lin Wanru, was murdered. He was still uneasy, affected by the horrific image of the murderer, and had even placed this half-finished Buddha statue by his bedside for peace of mind. The ebony had a faint woody fragrance. According to folklore, such items are considered complete after being sealed for 3 days. This Buddha statue has been in the drawer for more than 3 days, so in my opinion, it already possesses protective properties. I handed the ebony Buddha statue to Feifei. I usually keep this in the bag in my school bag. This isn't a toy, so don't take it out to play with it. Just let it stay with you. Okay, thank you. Feifei obediently took it and went back to the sofa in the living room. She carefully placed the Buddha statue in the bag in her school bag, picked up her school bag, and went back to the bedroom. She asked, Uncle Shun, where will I sleep tonight? You sleep in the bedroom, and I'll sleep on the sofa outside. I've already made arrangements. Without thinking, she replied, I've already arranged everything. Feifei shook her head. This room is too small. If you're working tonight, I'll disturb you if I sleep here. She paused and took out a set of keys from her school bag. My house is bigger than yours. Why don't we just move downstairs? There are 2 bedrooms downstairs. I was stunned for a moment. Feifei continued. Why don't we just move downstairs? There are 2 bedrooms downstairs. I was stunned for a moment. Feifei continued. That way, we can live more comfortably. And you'll save on rent too. The apartment on the 3rd floor was bought by my mom. The mortgage is long paid off. I hesitated. If we move downstairs, will you be worried? I asked. The place where Lin Wanru was murdered is right downstairs, right by the living room door. I'm worried that seeing that place every day will trigger painful memories for Feifei. A smile appeared on Feifei's face. She shook her head and said sensibly, I've come to terms with my mother's death. Even if I feel sad and grieving in the future, it will just be a memory. I'll write it in my diary and won't let anyone see it. She paused, then seemed to make a decision and added, yes, only you can see it. I smiled and reached out to pat her head. Since we decided to move, the apartment downstairs had been vacant for a long time after the murder and needed cleaning. Actually, I wasn't afraid of anything. I'd even seen Lin Wanru's roaming, harmful ways, and had the upper hand in our encounter. We got right to work. We went up to the 3rd floor, and I tore off the yellow seal. Feifei took out her key and turned the doorknob. The doors and windows were tightly closed, and a stuffy, musty smell wafted out, seeping into our hearts. A chill ran through me. Feifei, standing beside me, visibly shivered. I also had a strange feeling the room seemed to be filled with a heavy, gloomy atmosphere. Wait outside, I said. I'll open the windows to let in some fresh air, and to keep the child out of bad luck. I went in alone, opening all the windows and lights. Then I went to the bathroom, filled a basin with water, and started wiping the furniture. Fei came in and started sweeping the bedroom. Because investigators had entered the room countless times, the floor was covered in footprints, and the furniture was covered in dust. We split up. After Fei finished cleaning the inner room, I looked up at her and said, I'll clean the living room. I washed the mop and went straight to the living room doorway, squatting down. There were many solidified dark stains in the grout lines of the floor tiles. I knew they were dried, dark red marks. To avoid triggering Fei's deepest, most terrifying memories, I used the mop and rag to thoroughly clean the dark marks from the grout lines until they were completely invisible. Just as I finished, I sensed something behind me. I turned around and saw Fei sitting on the sofa, staring unblinkingly at the ground, her eyes blurry with tears. She wiped them with her sleeve. She saw me looking over. She then lowered her head, opened her school bag, and headed towards the bedroom. I sighed inwardly and said, Don't go yet. The sheets and blankets need to be changed, and the quilts need to be taken outside to sun-dry and kill any mold. Okay, I'll tidy up my desk, Fei replied from inside. I stood up. If I had been hunched over working for this long before, my back would have ached, but now, with my increased physical strength, I felt no pain. I sat on the sofa to rest, pondering how to arrange my workbench and the belongings left by Yiting. I would find a spacious place to properly store all of these things. While I was resting, I took out my phone and looked through photos. These were taken earlier when I signed the adoption agreement at the Civil Affairs Bureau. According to procedure, there was still a 3-month observation period, so I took photos to save. My finger swiped through the album and jumped to the surveillance video sent to me by Sheriff Ma Jinlong. I hesitated slightly before opening it again. The familiar scene revealed itself to be the last available footage of night listening. Little Shun. Just then, a voice called from the stairwell outside the door. I looked up. I saw Aunt Shun, who lived on the 5th floor, standing there staring at me with terrified eyes. I quickly put down my phone and went outside. Aunt Shun was already incoherent, talking incoherently. I knew what she wanted to say, so I smiled and said, Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. It's like this. I've adopted Lin Wanru's daughter, Lin Fei. I wanted a more spacious place to live, so Fei and I were cleaning this room together, preparing to move in. Aunt Shun still looked terrified and shook her head. You're in this room? You're really brave. I heard that Miss Lin died a very horrible death, lying right there. She reached out to point to the living room door, but then suddenly withdrew her hand as if afraid of something, and retreated upstairs. After taking 2 steps, she turned back and reminded me worriedly. Go to old Lu at the end of the street, the fortune teller. Invite Lu Yisho over. Even if you're going to live here, you should have someone perform a ritual at home. As soon as she finished speaking, it was as if something was following her, and she ran away and disappeared around the corner. I chuckled and stared at the stairs, muttering to myself. Isn't Lu Yisho the guy who sells grilled fish? Back in the room, Fei had already finished cleaning and came out. She wanted to get some water from the water dispenser, but then she thought about where the water was. It's been too long since I've had a drink. Go upstairs and have one later. I'll clean the water dispenser tomorrow and replace it with a clean bottle of Lihihi water, I said. Okay, Fei nodded, picked up her school bag from the sofa, and prepared to go back to her room. But then she pointed to the phone on the table. Its screen still lit. Uncle Sean, was that the video on your phone you took of Aunt Yi? I glanced at the phone, thinking I'd rushed out and forgotten to turn off the video, so I shook my head and said no. Fei, carrying her school bag, walked to the bedroom door and muttered softly. Aunt Yi was just looking at me in the video. I thought she discovered you were secretly filming her. Hearing this, I shuddered. What? You could see that? My face was filled with shock. Fei, who had already reached the bedroom door, suddenly stopped, startled. I picked up my phone and quickly walked to her side, asking, You just said you saw Aunt Yi looking in the direction of the camera in the video? Fei paused, then nodded. She must have noticed someone was filming her. Uncle Shun, it really wasn't you who filmed her. I shook my head. Last time I saw Yiting turn her head to look at the camera, I asked Sheriff Ma Jinlong. Everyone else in the missing persons team said they hadn't seen anything, and even Hong Bin and his son couldn't find anything unusual when they watched the video. No one expected that this little girl would now be seeing the same scene I had seen before. I opened the video again and pulled Fei back to the sofa. Since I first saw Yiting looking at the camera, I hadn't seen the same scene again. It seemed to require a specific trigger probability. Since Fei had seen it, we had to try again. In the video, Yiting was standing by the bathroom window, talking and gesturing to the air, exactly the same as what I had seen before. But near the end, I, who had been paying close attention, suddenly felt a very brief pause in the video. The pause was fleeting and almost unnoticed unless you looked closely. Right after the pause, Yiting suddenly stopped talking and slowly turned his head to look at the camera. His gaze was focused and unblinking. Fei pointed at the phone screen and said, Look, Aunt Yi noticed someone is filming him. He might know the person filming the video. Hearing Fei's words, a strange feeling suddenly rose in my heart. I felt like I recognized him. I silently uttered those 2 words. The video was from the surveillance footage of the building diagonally across the street. There was no possibility that Yiting and the person filming knew each other. Was his strange behavior in the footage some kind of hint? Or did he discover something noteworthy in the direction of the video? Initially, I thought Yiting was watching me. Perhaps I was just being delusional. Maybe he knew the person filming the video. I silently uttered those 2 words again. Fei didn't know that his unintentional remark had already given me a clue. I got up and went to the bathroom, standing in front of the window facing the garbage alley. The view from here was almost the same as the rental apartment upstairs. I looked up and glanced sideways, quickly locking onto the building diagonally across the street based on my memory. Calculating the location, I focused my gaze on the 7th and 8th floors. The video was definitely filmed from that direction, although the cameras there had long since been removed. At dinner, Aunt Shun, who lived on the 5th floor, came down to warmly invite Fei and me to her house for dumplings. This family clearly pitted Fei for being an orphan. Fei wasn't shy and chatted enthusiastically with Aunt Shun's daughter. After dinner, the sky outside wasn't completely dark yet. I kept thinking about remembering the surveillance footage. I made an excuse to go shopping, leaving Fei at Aunt Shun's house to look after I crossed the street and arrived at the Jincheng building diagonally opposite. This building was originally an office building, but later most of it was subdivided into rooms for rent, creating a chaotic residential building. I followed a man and a woman into the elevator and pressed the button for the 7th floor. They wanted to go to the 11th floor. After the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, I stepped out first. When I inadvertently looked back, I noticed the woman in the elevator was scanning her surroundings with a strange look, while the man was frantically pressing the close button, seemingly not wanting to stay on the 7th floor for even a second longer. The elevator doors quickly closed and continued upwards. I stood outside the elevator, somewhat surprised. The man and woman clearly didn't want to linger on this floor. The sky was gradually darkening, but the motion-activated lights in the hallway remained off. This floor was too quiet. To the right was a closed stairwell. To the left, a straight corridor, one side lined with apartment doors, the other with a railing. I hadn't been sure if the camera was on the 7th or 8th floor and was trying to eliminate possibilities, but standing here, the unsettling feeling made me certain I didn't need to go up to the 8th floor. Something was wrong with this floor. I leaned against the railing to confirm the opposite direction, then moved towards the end of the corridor. Only when I reached the end did I find the viewing distance in the video. Passing the first closed door, my intuition told me no one was inside. As I passed the second door, I could faintly hear voices and the clinking of dishes. From the third door, I heard coughs and footsteps. It turned out that this floor wasn't empty. The residents had all kept their doors tightly shut, making the corridor seem eerily silent. Soon, I reached the end of the corridor. At the very end, there was another apartment, its door also tightly shut and completely still. It was now completely dark. I lightly stomped my foot, and the dim motion-activated light above my head turned on. In the vast corridor, only the light above my head was conspicuously bright. I suddenly felt an urge for it to go out quickly, lest it attract the attention of unknown eyes in the darkness. Suddenly, my gaze sharpened. Near the corner of the exterior wall above my head, there was a small, fallen metal frame, just the right size to fit a security camera. Just then, the motion-activated light abruptly went out, plunging everything into darkness. I stomped my foot again, turning the light back on, and continued to look at the metal frame. I discovered a very faint trace of wiring on the ceiling. The trace extended straight into the corridor. Above the door of the house at the end of the corridor, there was a repaired hole in the wall, which was the entrance to the wire. It seemed that the surveillance camera that captured the eerie video was brought out from this house. I took a deep breath, took 2 steps forward, and listened carefully to the tightly closed door. It was deathly silent inside. Just then, the motion-activated light went out again. Almost at the same moment, a door creaked open in the darkness, and the sound stopped quickly. The door seemed to have only opened a crack. I was stunned. Anyone else would have broken out in a cold sweat, but I didn't. I immediately realized that the door that had just opened wasn't in front of me, but behind me. I immediately turned around, clapped my hands to turn on the motion-activated light, and the nearest security door behind me was open a crack. It was completely silent. I didn't ask who it was, but instead took a step forward. Before my second step even landed, the door was suddenly pulled shut from the inside with a bang. I was startled and looked over in surprise. The door had slammed shut from the inside with a bang. The door was abruptly pulled shut, startling me. I looked in surprise, but after a moment, there was no movement behind the door. My gaze gradually turned cold. The immense strength in my hands gave me an urge to smash open the security door and find out what was going on. Forcibly calming myself down, I turned and went to the end of the corridor. Taking advantage of the moment the motion-activated light went out, I reached out and knocked on the door. The moment the knock sounded, the motion-activated light was also activated again. At first, there was no response from inside. I knocked harder. 10 seconds later, I heard very faint footsteps inside. I stepped back halfway, turned the lock, and the door, secured with a security chain, opened a crack the size of a fist. A little boy, about 8 or 9 years old, peered into the doorway, looking at me fearfully. "Who are you looking for?" he asked in a timid voice. I smiled and said, "Hello, little friend. I live across the street. Are your parents home? I need to bother them for a moment." The little boy shook his head. "No, they're not there. When will they be back?" I asked the little boy. The boy shook his head again, saying he didn't know. I paused for a moment, then nodded, saying, "Okay. If you're home alone, make sure the door is closed. If someone knocks, you can choose not to answer or answer from inside. But you don't need to open the door like you are now and say thank you, uncle." The little boy closed the door and listened to my footsteps receding into the distance before turning and walking into the dimly lit living room. There were 2 beds in the room, one large and one small, opposite a large solid wood wardrobe. Just as the little boy walked towards his small bed, a man's voice came from the kitchen. "Who was that?" The boy paused and said softly, "A stranger." He knocked on the wrong door. The sound of dishes clattering and water running came from the kitchen. The little boy glanced at his digital watch and suddenly became tense, quickly burrowing under the covers and covering himself completely, leaving only a crack as he stared outside. Around 8 o'clock, a man emerged from the kitchen doorway. He didn't move his hands, but stiffly moved his feet to the wardrobe and stood there. He slowly pulled open a door. The cabinet door stared intently inside, then remained motionless. In the silent room, the man stood motionless, his back to the boy, exuding an inexplicable eeriness. The boy in bed unconsciously shrank back, breaking out in a cold sweat. Since the boy's parents weren't there, I decided to check back during the day. Back in the Evergreen Ivy League neighborhood, my neighbor Xiao Ning was tutoring Fei Fei with her homework. I didn't disturb them and went straight to Fei Fei's apartment on the 3rd floor to collect the bed. While they were doing this, the residents going up and down the stairs noticed the light was on in this room, and everyone cast surprised glances. Half an hour later, I went to pick Fei Fei up. That night, I slept on the sofa. Fei Fei was going back to the Old Town No. 1 school the next day. Although the transfer procedures had been complicated, he was happier than anyone else to be back with his familiar friends. The next morning, I intended to take Fei Fei to school, but I overslept. The alarm clock had clearly been disturbed by his and Fei Fei's happiness. The alarm had obviously been turned off beforehand. A neat note lay on the coffee table. "Uncle Shun, I'm going to school. It's very close. No need to pick me up or drop me off. I left you a key downstairs. I'll be back right after school. Goodbye, kid." I smiled, then realized I was wearing a fatherly smile. I quickly straightened my face. After washing up, I went out, completed the formalities, and contacted the landlord to terminate the lease. Although there were still 2 weeks left on the lease, the landlord didn't say anything, only asking me to keep the unexpected events in the house a secret and keep the house clean so it could be rented to the next day. At noon, I called a moving company to move the workbench and all the miscellaneous items to the third floor. Actually, I could have moved them all by myself, but the scene was too unbelievable, and I didn't want to arouse suspicion. Packing took up the entire afternoon. When I finished, Fei had already returned with her little school bag. Did you move everything down? The little girl poured herself half a glass of water and drank it all in one gulp, turning back to ask, yes, we've almost finished moving everything. You've been busy all day. As I arranged the things in my hands, I replied, thank you for your hard work. Fei smiled, and I paused for a moment. Fei went into the bedroom and started her homework without anyone rushing her. 20 minutes later, the little one had finished and put everything away. When I was changing the bedding, I saw Fei roll up her sleeves and walk into the kitchen. I was surprised again and followed her in. Fei was standing on a small wooden stool, pouring rice into the rice cooker. Turning back to see me looking at her, Fei asked, do you usually eat a lot? I didn't answer, but instead asked in surprise, you're going to cook? Otherwise what? The little girl, while adding water and rinsing the rice, replied, do you eat out every day or eat instant noodles? I felt embarrassed and smiled. Actually, I can also make fried rice. Fei turned back and said, Mom used to come home very late, so I'm used to being alone. When she's not home, I cook for her and leave it warm so she can have a hot meal when she comes home at night. Sometimes I can't get into the house, so I run to Uncle Shin's place. At this, Fei laughed. If it weren't for this, our relationship wouldn't be so good. Hearing his words, I was somewhat moved. Fei turned back to continue what she was doing, unaware of my change in expression. I can cook many dishes some my mother taught me, some I learned on my own. Sometimes I put too much salt in, and my mother would try to pretend it was delicious. At this point, Fei smiled. I stood silently at the kitchen doorway. Uncle Shan, could you please go to the market and buy some meat, tomatoes, potatoes, bok choy, some scallions and garlic? Oh, and a jar of fermented bean paste too. Fei turned back and said, okay. I nodded. Be careful standing on the stool, I'll be right back. I glanced at Fei, who was busy at work, and suddenly felt a strange, indescribable feeling. I picked up my phone and left, not forgetting to close the living room door. On the way to the market, I bought tomatoes, potatoes, and 2 cartons of eggs. I weighed half a pound of bok choy and grabbed a handful of scallions. Looking up, I saw a man leading a little boy at a nearby stall. I was about to look away, but then I paused, my gaze falling on the little boy. The child's face looked familiar. I instantly remembered. I woke up to find that the little boy I saw when I knocked on the door of the building last night was the same boy standing before me. He was wearing the same school uniform as Fei and holding hands with a man who was disheveled, with a stubble beard and grime-covered clothes, giving off an unkempt vibe. The little boy also saw me, his expression faltering, clearly recognizing me. He immediately shrank back, turned his head, and pretended not to see me. After I paid, the father and son left hand in hand. During this time, the little boy secretly glanced back at me. I was puzzled by his appearance. Going to check the 7th floor of the Jingxing building was just a spur-of-the-moment decision. If it weren't for Fei's words, I wouldn't have suspected. The 7th floor was indeed strange. Last night, when the motion-activated lights in the corridor went out, the security door next door suddenly opened a crack without a sound or a trace, which was inexplicably eerie. In addition, this little boy clearly saw me last night, but pretended not to recognize me, as if he was hiding something. I decided to go and check night listening again. There must be a reason in that direction. Just outside the market, there was a newspaper vendor at the intersection shouting that the Young Evening News and the City Daily were only 1 yuan each. I rarely read newspapers, but I thought I could use them to pay for the work. I spent another $1 to buy 2 more newspapers and returned to the 3rd floor of the Evergreen Ivy community. The door was wide open, and Fei was standing alone at the door, looking on expectantly. Why did you leave the door open when you're home alone? I asked, a little worried. Everyone here knows me. I'm not in any danger. Fei replied. Who said that? I thought of her mother, Lin Wanru, who was murdered in the house without anyone noticing. I went inside and closed the door. After I finished preparing, Fei, wearing a little apron and carrying a wooden stool, came over and took over the rest of the work. Soon, the sound of cooking came from the kitchen, and the smell of oil wafted into the living room. I opened the window and said to Fei, turn on the range hood. It's been broken for a long time. Fei's childish voice came out and turned on the exhaust fan. I went to the kitchen door, which was also broken. Fei said while busy. I was taken aback. I'll call someone to fix it tomorrow. You can go out first. The kitchen smells very strong, Fei reminded me. Looking at her, so much so that she was acting like a little adult for her age, I couldn't help but smile. I opened the kitchen window wider before returning to the living room, picked up the newspaper I had just bought, and flipped through it a few times. My eyes narrowed, and I cursed with a smile. Damn it. No wonder 2 copies only cost $1. I flipped to page 6 of the evening paper, and it was completely blank. Strange that 2 copies only cost 1 yuan. I picked up the city newspaper and flipped to page 6, and it was also empty. This unscrupulous newspaper seller must have picked out the misprinted newspapers and sold them in bulk at a low price. I just happened to be there. But then I thought, I don't have time to worry about such trivial matters. I'll tidy up the coffee table. Dinner's ready. Fei's voice came from the kitchen. I casually spread the misprinted newspapers on the coffee table to prevent them from getting dirty. The food was served, its aroma filling the air. I couldn't help but chuckle and reminded her, take off your apron and eat quickly. You don't need to wash the dishes later. Fei picked up some food while shaking her head. I'll clean up after you finish eating, I said. It's good. Much better than my fried rice. Then, I picked up a piece of garlic bok choy and put it in my mouth, immediately pausing. Why isn't it good? Fei, sitting across from me, asked nervously. My slightly furrowed brows quickly relaxed, and I nodded repeatedly, saying, delicious, delicious. I just ate too fast and chipped my tooth. That plate of bok choy looked great, but it was way too salty. It tasted bitter. I remembered Fei saying that her mother had pretended not to notice when she added too much salt, eating and praising it as she ate. Comparing the two, I unconsciously gave a fatherly smile, which then froze on my face. Fei said, if it's delicious, eat more. You have to finish the food, you can't waste it. When I was in the orphanage, the volunteer aunties had to supervise us every day. I couldn't taste the saltiness of the food after finishing my plate, so I drank a lot of potato and mincemeat soup. Oh dear, I've been eating too many vegetables these past few days, so I wanted to drink more soup. I immediately poured myself half a bowl of light meat broth. After washing the dishes, I drank 2 glasses of water and then sat down at my workbench in the bedroom. I was working on wood carving. If you need anything, call me, Fei answered, but soon she came in quietly, carrying a book and slippers. She was working with a flat-bladed knife. I glanced back and smiled. You can lean against my headboard and read. I won't use the electric dental drill today, so it won't disturb you. Fei nodded gently, climbed onto the headboard, and quietly started reading. I knew this girl was insecure and would be afraid to be alone in the living room. The room became quiet, with only the sound of turning pages and the friction of the flat-bladed knife cutting wood. Since absorbing the abnormal properties, I found that not only had the strength of my hands increased significantly, but the control of my index finger had also become extremely strong. When working on wood carving, as long as the image was formed in my mind, the finished product in my hands would have a 99% similarity. It wasn't until I stopped hearing the forge rip for a long time that I turned around and found that Fei had fallen asleep. I carried her back to the bed. After she fell asleep, I carried her back to the next bedroom, covered her with a blanket, dimmed the bedside lamp, and plugged in an electric mosquito repellent before quietly leaving. After moving her to the 3rd floor, to make it easier to care for her, I forced myself to stop closing the bedroom door when I slept, suppressing my obsessive-compulsive tendencies. The next morning, Fei left very quietly and still didn't wake me. At 8 o'clock, I woke up, washed up, and casually opened the bathroom window to ventilate. The stench from the trash cans had lessened considerably. It must have been after the Lin Wanru incident that the sheriff had increased sanitation efforts in the area. Looking into the distance, I quickly spotted the 7th floor of the Jinxing building, stopping at the end of the corridor where surveillance cameras had been installed. After a while, the child should have gone to school. His father looked very tired and was probably resting at home. At that moment, I had the idea of sneaking in to check. With the strength of my hands, I could break the security door lock with my bare hands. However, it would be unwise to act during the day. Going at night would also be risky, and I couldn't reveal my true identity. Gradually, I made up a plan. While thinking about it, I took the key and went out to Donghua shop. These past few days, I had encountered a series of strange events in the matter of adopting Fei. The shop was almost abandoned. That was my foundation. I had to get it up and running. Otherwise, the two of us would probably be left with nothing. When I arrived at Donghua shop, the doors had been open for an hour, but not a single customer had come in. I rested my chin on my hand and wondered if I should do a promotion. I had originally planned to launch a series of anime figurines from my past life, but that would take too much time. The strange events I had encountered recently had already given me enough brain power. I really didn't have any extra energy to spare. After thinking about it for a while, I called Li Nijing. As soon as the call connected, Li Nijing said, "I was just about to call you." "Is that right? What's up?" I asked. "I need your help to check out a building near your house." Li Nijing said, "I just went to town with Xiao Wenba to handle a case today. Brother Zhou, I haven't returned to Youngest City yet after 2 days of business trips, so none of you can come." "Which building are you referring to? What do you want to see?" I asked curiously. "It's the Jinxing building," Li Nijing explained. "It's not far from where you live. People have been calling the police saying there's a case in the building." My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately perked up my ears. Then the street police officers went to check, but they found nothing. No one was kidnapped, tortured, or illegally detained. No fights or criminals hiding there either. "So what am I going to do?" Li Nijing said. Although other officers checked and found nothing, residents of that building still call the police every few days, still saying there's a case in the building. So far, the officers have responded 8 times, but they still haven't found anything. I nodded, understanding. "Is it classified as a special case now?" "Not yet." Li Nijing didn't know what I was thinking, but simply said, "We're not here. Could you please come and take a look?" "Actually, the case might not be related to anything unusual." "Don't go inside," she said. "You don't need to go into any room. Just feel around. If you feel something in a certain place, if you're interested, get out of there immediately and call me. I'll have the regular security officer seal off the area and come back as soon as possible." "Okay, no problem." I readily agreed. "What did the person who called the police say?" Although my heart was racing, I pretended not to know anything and continued to question. Li Nijing said, "They often hear banging sounds coming from the walls and occasionally loud cursing and crying, but they can't pinpoint the source of the sounds. They can hear them day and night." I asked no. Li Nijing shook his head. "It's mostly at night, when the residents are all home from work." "Do you know which floors they hear it from?" "Most people on the 6th, 7th, and 8th floors hear it, and occasionally people on the 9th floor can hear it too." Li Nijing said. "The residents there have started to become suspicious, wondering if a murderer or a tyrant is hiding among the people living on those floors." He paused, then continued. "Actually, the security officers have investigated every household in the building and checked their homes. Go and walk around, especially those floors that are worth noting. Remember, don't go inside. If you sense anything, get out immediately and report to us." "Okay, take the extendable baton I gave you last time and hang up the phone." I'm pretty sure this special case is most likely related to that strange child and his family at the end of the 7th floor corridor. The strange noises are around the 7th floor. It's impossible for multiple anomalies to occur in one building. Since Li Nijing has spoken, I might as well take this opportunity to go and check it out, but I still don't plan to expose myself. If necessary, I might even sneak into that child's house. Li Nijing doesn't want me to go in alone because she's worried about my safety, but only I know my trump cards: mental antibodies, physical enhancements, and latent skills. My current methods are no less than those of a real investigator. A moment later, Li Nijing sent me the door numbers of all the residents of the Jinxing building. I immediately flipped to the information of the family at the end of the corridor on the 7th floor, carefully examining the nameplate and the name. I muttered, "He Jun, Mei Rulin, He Xiao. This should be the family that installed the camera before. That strange child seems to be named He Xiao Wei." I had a plan in mind. That day, I closed the market early and went to buy groceries. As I was leaving the market, a figure carrying an extra-large bomb walked past me and almost bumped into me. I looked up and saw it was the newspaper vendor who sold me the misprinted newspaper yesterday. The vendor didn't recognize me and stopped, asking, "What kind of newspaper do you want?" I didn't speak, just stared at it. This middle-aged man had a kind face and didn't seem like a cunning person, but I knew that appearances can be deceiving. He was slow to react when I stared at him and asked again, "Do you want to buy a newspaper?" "Yes, give me an evening paper." I suddenly chuckled inwardly. There was no need to haggle with a newspaper vendor over $1. I took out $1, handed it over. The vendor took the money, folded the newspaper, handed it to me, and turned to leave. Back at home in the Evergreen Ivy community, I threw the newspaper on the sofa. After washing the vegetables in the kitchen, I sat back down on the sofa a while before Fifa and I got out of school. I picked up the newspaper I had just bought and casually flipped through it for about 5 or 6 minutes. Then my gaze froze. I slowly laid the newspaper flat on the coffee table. The spot where page 6 used to be was now blank, exactly the same as yesterday. I rubbed my chin. That newspaper seller was incompetent, always doing this kind of trick. Either I was just unlucky, or there was a problem with the printing. I stared at the blank page, puzzled. Just then, Feifei came back with her school bag. I greeted her, then went inside and efficiently finished her homework. I put away the newspaper, suppressed my doubts, and followed her into the kitchen to help Feifei. Dinner was just right. After dinner, we went downstairs for a walk. Although Feifei no longer had her mother by her side, she still felt cared for, which lessened her feelings of depression considerably. After returning home, we each did some. I ate a wood carving for a while, then looked back at Feifei. She was curled up in a ball, fast asleep, with her extracurricular book in her arms. After carrying Feifei back to the bedroom, covering her with a blanket, dimming the lights, and taking a shower myself, it was nearly 11 p.m. After checking the doors, windows, and gas, I went into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. This was the first time I was about to use my pre-skill, mental antibody, which was currently at level 5 and fully active. I noticed the progress bar at the corner of my eye and stared at myself in the mirror, activating the pre-skill, face swap. The next second, a change occurred beneath my skin. In the blink of an eye, a completely unfamiliar face appeared in the mirror. One layer of mental antibody had been depleted, leaving 4 layers. The person in the mirror had single eyelids, prominent cheekbones, a sunken nose, and thick lips, not even reaching 110 of my original stunning beauty. But when I touched my prominent cheekbones, they felt solid, as if naturally grown, without any trace of artifice. I had simply activated the skill, and the face had naturally formed. I hadn't intentionally tried to become anyone else. As midnight approached, the neighborhood was silent. I changed into a light black long-sleeve tracksuit for mosquito repellent, and put on soft-soled shoes to ensure stealth. Silently and quietly, I reached the door, turned off the lights, unlocked it, and double-locked. I knew I couldn't be seen at this moment otherwise. With this unfamiliar face, I'd definitely be mistaken for a thief and beaten up. Leaving the complex, my face felt like it was wearing a mask. There was no need to hide anything. I quickly arrived at the Jinxing building. The evening security office was deserted. I took the elevator straight to the 7th floor, silently walking in my soft-soled sneakers. The motion-activated lights in the corridor remained off. Reaching the He family's door at the end, I touched the lock. With a slight push, the strange power in my fingers instantly swelled to my fingertips. At that moment, I was certain that with just these few fingers, I could break the lock. Just as I was about to act, a very soft sound came from behind me. Yes, even the motion-activated lights hadn't been activated. I'd heard that sound before it came from the security door behind me. Turning my head, I saw, under the streetlights, that door had indeed silently opened a crack again, looking extremely eerie. My intuition told me this was no simple matter. I suppressed the urge to investigate and stared quietly for about 2 minutes. Then, the security door creaked shut with a click. Whether someone was watching or not, I didn't dwell on it. With no other thoughts in mind, I turned my attention back to the lock. I inserted my fingers directly into the latch, my super strong finger strength snapping and deforming the metal. I pressed the latch, silently pulled open the door, and slipped inside. In that instant, I seemed to hear a series of faint scratching sounds of fingernails scraping against the metal door panel from behind the security door. The room was pitch black. I dared not turn on my phone flashlight, fearing to disturb the people inside. To see in the dark, I secretly activated my previous skill. My right eye instantly filled with a layer of red light, which quickly disappeared. Looking around, the darkness had vanished, and the environment inside was as clear as a gray-white night vision goggles. Looking up at the ceiling of the hallway, there were traces of wiring, extending to what looked like the master bedroom. Behind the closed door was probably the transmission line for the surveillance video. My gaze shifted to the living room, and I was momentarily stunned. The arrangement was too strange. There were 2 beds, one large and one small, placed directly against the wall, along with a large wardrobe. It was clearly being used as a bedroom. The bedding on the small bed was slightly arched, presumably belonging to the boy named He Xiaowei. Even snoring came from the large bed, the male homeowner, He Jun. From my perspective, a red aura, like a thermal feedback, gradually rose from the position of the 2 beds. Strangely, red aura was also rising from the position of the wardrobe in the living room. Looking at another tightly closed door, I could also vaguely see a wisp of red aura rolling through the wall. I quietly moved to the kitchen to check, but found nothing. I then pushed open one of the closed doors, which led to a small bedroom, but the bed was gone. It was obviously the one that had been moved to the living room. When I returned to the living room and approached He Xiaowei's small bed, the room became deathly silent. If I could hear it, I instinctively... A slight creak came from the direction of the large bed, and He Jun sat bolt upright. The room fell silent again, even breathing seemed to have ceased. I held my breath, only my eyes visible, staring intently at him. In Baitong's view, He Jun's eyes were half open, half closed. If he were a normal person, there should have been some follow-up action. But he did nothing, just sat there eerily silent and motionless on the bed. Was he sleepwalking, or had he fallen asleep again in that position? I don't know how long he had been waiting, but a sigh finally broke the silence. He Jun didn't throw off the covers instead. He stood up straight. His gait was extremely stiff. His bare feet made a soft thud on the ground. He didn't go to the bathroom, but slowly walked towards the large wardrobe in the living room. He reached out and slowly pulled open the 2 wardrobe doors. After the slight scraping of the wood, he froze in place, making no further movement, seemingly staring intently. Deep inside the wardrobe, I couldn't believe his eyes were still closed. He must have opened them. What was this guy looking at that could make him so engrossed? After waiting for so long, Hee-jun showed no sign of leaving. My legs were also going numb. Using the wooden board at the foot of the bed, I carefully half stood up, bent over, and stared intently at his back. If he moved, I would immediately crouch down. I knew very well that a normal person would never stand barefoot on the ground in the middle of the night, staring intently at the open wardrobe in the darkness. What was Hee-jun's abnormal behavior? Was this wardrobe related to Yi Ting's disappearance? I wanted to know the answer to all of this. I stood up and waited for my numb legs to regain feeling before slowly walking towards the head of the small bed. Half of my attention was on Hee-jun in front of the wardrobe, and the other half was on Hee-xiaowei on the bed. I was prepared to confront the abnormal Hee-jun at any time, but I was also worried about waking the child. If things didn't go well, I planned to retreat first, and then find a way to get closer to the head of the bed. An indescribable strange feeling welled up. I frowned slightly, and very slowly lifted the blanket a little. The moment I saw the boy clearly, my hand jerked violently. Hee-xiaowei's eyes were wide open, devoid of color, his lips slightly parted, his expression frozen as if by an invisible force. Startled, I reached out to check his nostrils. He was still breathing, but unconscious. He wasn't in immediate danger. It seemed he'd been forcibly rendered unconscious by some strange force. This wasn't the first time this had happened. I regained my composure and turned to look at Hee-jun. He was still standing in front of the wardrobe with his back to me, like a statue. What was inside? I hesitated slightly, then crept closer to him along the wall. Hee-jun's consciousness was clearly impaired. I wasn't worried about being discovered. As I drew nearer, my expression grew increasingly serious. A very low, rapid murmur entered my ear, almost inaudible unless I was close enough to the wardrobe. I couldn't tell if the sound was speaking, chanting, or just meaningless syllables. But one thing was certain. The sound came from the depths of the dark, enclosed wardrobe in front of Hee-jun. It seemed to be speaking to him,